Okay, we're calling the Select Board's public hearing into session a little bit about 7:06 here at the Harvey Wheeler Center with glamorous new acoustical items here. And before I get too far in, this is a public meeting and we are being recorded and also well heard, I think, which just to remind everybody who comes up to any of the microphones, you need to turn them on when you speak directly into them, and then turn them off when you're finished. That will make sure that your voice is heard and not others. So welcome. We have a full agenda tonight, or set of articles tonight, and I suspect there'll be lots of conversation. In general, I just want to remind everybody that we are here and all are encouraged to ask questions and seek clarifications of the articles that are being presented. But tonight's hearing is not intended to debate the merits of the issues, but to point out anything that is unclear. Obviously, people will take the opportunity to discuss areas of interest. But let's keep this as respectful and on point as we can. And that's particularly true if you have a burning issue to bring up and it's already been made. It's a full house, and I'd like to make sure everybody gets some sleep, especially anybody that was up late last night. So with that, looks like I have two articles on my docket, choosing the town officers and hearing reports. Both of those are typically handled at town meeting by the town moderator. Choosing town officers is a report of the recent elections, which haven't happened yet, so that is a non-event for this meeting. And the report would be the annual report. Again, we don't have that yet, so I'm not quite sure why we have 1 and 2 here, but now everybody knows what to expect. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Grom for the first citizens petition allowing 17-year-olds to vote in town elections and town meetings, with the acknowledgement that the person joining him on the platform is my daughter. So I'm happy to leave the room if people need me to. She'd probably like that.
How's that? Better? So this is Article 18. I'm Robert Grom, Mildred Circle, and with me is Abby Gordy, student at the high school. There's growing interest in many parts of the United States to extend voting rights to all those eligible to vote. Currently, however, 17-year-olds cannot vote in most elections and at town meetings. This article is a small step in a much larger nationwide effort to allow 17-year-olds and in many cases 16-year-olds to vote in local and statewide elections. There are active campaigns to lower the voting age in 7 states and the District of Columbia. In California, for example, an assembly constitutional amendment would lower the voting age to 17 for the statewide. In Colorado, people are also working on lowering the voting age to school board elections, which I find very interesting. Washington, D.C. would lower the voting age to 16 in all elections, and the state of New York also has a bill that calls for voting age to be lowered to 17. In Massachusetts, there are currently 3 bills being heard by our state legislature, specifically by the Committee on Election Laws, to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote. H.R. 38 in Shelburne, Mass., H. 3861 in Wendell, and H. 3872 in Ashfield. All 3 towns are located near Greenfield, Mass., and there were a couple of friends, high school seniors, that got together and wrote an article and had their town meetings pass the article, and the article went on its way to the state legislature. In Ashfield, for example, Aaron Nelson, the petitioner, is quoted in the town meeting minutes that he believes this will help build citizenship, and he explained that 16 and 17-year-olds have the mental capacity to be qualified voters and are more likely to continue to vote throughout life if they start early. And now we'll hear from
Hi, again, I'd like to say my name is Abby Gordy, and I'm a junior at Concord Carlisle High School. And this article first was brought to my attention because I'm a member in a student organization that is generally focused on maintaining political activism and political involvement, both in high school life and beyond. And I think that this article is particularly important for a town like Concord to consider because we are incredibly fortunate to have both a lively direct democracy by way of town meeting and a community that really cares about our local government. I myself have attended many town meetings over the years, whether as a ballot counter observer or a tag-along forcibly brought there by my mother, but enjoying it nonetheless. And that has been incredibly important to me as I've grown up in this town, but not every high school student engages like that. And it's not because they don't care about the town or the issues that surround the town, particularly those pertaining to the school. But as a high school student, when you're overscheduled and stressed out, you have to weigh your options. And there's a difference between listening, showing up and listening to issues that really matter to you and even speaking on those and being able to vote in them. If you can't vote at town meeting, you end up sitting in the visitors' bleachers, which, although very nice and provided by a newly renovated high school that we were all very thankful for, when you're sitting in those bleachers, you will listen to hours of important and wonky town debate, but you won't get to truly speak on those issues because you won't be able to vote on them. And the disconnect that this creates between the town government and the student body and the youth population in our township is very detrimental because particularly 17-year-olds have an incredibly important voice in our community. We've grown up in this town. We've grown up in the school systems. We know what it's like to be a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old or an 8-year-old in this township and in our schools. So we bring an incredibly important perspective, particularly on matters like the school budget or like the school committee, because we understand what really happens. We feel the effects of what happens when the school budget changes or when new members are elected to the school committee and the administration starts to change. We feel that. And so I believe that our voice is incredibly important, particularly on issues like that. And beyond the school community, we understand many important parts of this town. We regularly use the green space. We understand the hurdles of mid-morning traffic and rush hour, so we try to get home to start hours of homework. We understand, we can empathize with those who have trouble finding parking, and we understand the importance of green spaces and have been trained since elementary school to value our town's historical nature and historic sites. So I believe that this article is worth considering and worth voting for because as 17-year-olds, we are citizens of this town who have grown up in it, really understand it, understand the schools, are engaged, are active, and are willing to show up if we are given the chance to really speak our mind and vote. So I would ask you to consider this article. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. Very well put. Much better than I could have. Here we go. That has to be filled in at some point. So in closing, 17-year-olds cope with many responsibilities that most adults are all too familiar with. They drive cars in all states. With parental permission, they can join our armed forces. And over 1 million Americans under the age of 18 have jobs. Studies have shown that current 17-year-olds are fully capable of making informed political decisions and often vote at higher rates than other age groups. The age group with the lowest voter turnout, by the way, is 18 through 24. Concordians are fortunate to have excellent teachers at our schools who play a large part in providing the educational foundation enabling our students to make decisions based on knowledge and good judgment. Being able to vote at the age of 17 will likely result in becoming a more involved and productive member of society. So I urge you to support Article 18. Thank you. Any questions?
Dee, do you need a mic? Turn that one off.
Thank you. Dee Ortner, 169 Thoreau Street. I have a couple of questions. The first one is very simple. With the current legislation or the bills in the House, and it's 16 and 17-year-olds that are included on that, have you given any consideration to making the 16 and 17-year-olds? That's one question. The other is I'd like to understand the process involved with regards to our warrant article relative to any bill at the House or that goes through the legislature. Could you explain that?
Sure. First, the process. Town meeting has to pass this article. Then the select board, by passing the article, is being asked to engage our representative and our senator to introduce a bill, a homeroom bill, allowing the town to change its bylaw. And specifically what has to be changed is the definition of qualified voter. It's a legal term. Once the legislature approves this legislation, then it comes back to town meeting and we vote on adding this bylaw.
So that would take place, would there be sufficient time so that if we passed it at town meeting this year, it could be on our ballot in November?
We all would have to call our representative and senator to get it through the state legislature. That would help.
All right, looking at it in the opposite direction, if the House bills pass at the state legislature, would our students, would our 17-year-olds be automatically included, or would we have to do something else at this level?
As I understand it, and I haven't done too much research on this, but there's a joint committee on election laws, and once it gets out of that committee, it could go to the two bodies and then be approved. So it's a little bit of a process.
So that once it's approved at the state level, it automatically can be enforced at the local level or
I think
used
we
at the
need
local
another
level?
bylaw article passed by town meeting.
Well, then, I'm wondering, could we include that as an amendment to this article, that if in fact it is passed at the state level, it would automatically be included?
That's,
No,
I
that
would have
can't
to
happen?
check with our town clerk and moderator,
Oh,
you know,
all right.
if that's possible. but
Okay.
I
And-
haven't thought of that.
Any further comment about 16-year-olds?
No, I thought about that, you know, for a while, and I had some discussions with our town clerk, who was very helpful, by the way, in enabling me to get this up here as of today. And so I guess there are some stipulations that are a little different for 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds. And I don't know the details, but, you know, if you're really interested, I will find out and get back to you.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions?
Yes, Mr. Grom, Steving, Select Board.
Sure.
I was just wondering if what your knowledge or thoughts were about the responsibilities associated with this bylaw for the 17-year-old who would be given the right to vote. Does he or she, I don't believe folks at that age right now can be on a town committee. Is that true?
That is true. The only thing that they'll be able to do is vote in town elections, town meeting, and any kind of town-wide referendum or
So-
questionnaire or something like that. They
so
can't
get
hold
the
office.
Right, so they get the easy stuff then.
There you go. That's correct.
Okay, so that's good. I think you got to clarify that,
It's-
then people can understand like what the role or what their, the role they're allowed to play
Sure.
as a registered voter.
It's in the explanation underneath the article in the warrant book,
Okay.
that they can't hold office.
And then I guess that would also require the town to generate a second ballot.
That's correct.
So at the voting station, you know, you would have a certain classification, so.
Yeah.
It's all technical stuff, I just was
No,
wondering
but
about that.
it could
Okay.
mean a slight increase in cost.
Right.
But I think the benefit
minimal,
would
yeah, yeah.
hugely outweigh the additional cost.
Okay, okay. Well, thank you.
Okay, great. All set?
Thank you, Mr. Grom. All right. So our next article is Article 20, Citizen Petition, brought by Tanya and Mark Galis of the press.
This is on? Okay, good, it was on. Hi, I'm Mark Galis. I live at 62 Prescott Road. My wife Tanya and I put this article on town warrant by petition because we think it's important for the town to consider this change carefully. The article that we filed talks about reversing the town manager's decision because of the nature of our town charter. We have a strong town manager, so the town meeting can't really force the town manager to change his decision, but so the final motion at the town will be something on the order of the town, you know, does the town urge or request that the town manager reverse the decision and urge the select board to request that the town manager reverse the decision. And keep an independent CCTV for the public, educational, and government access services. I assume this is the correct one. So the question here is, what's the best model for PEG access for the town, for public, education, government television, if we want to provide independence, strength, growth, and resilience for this important information service? So just a little bit of background. I hope I'm still clear. If you search for FCC PEG, FCC PEG, on the federal FCC website, there's information that would allow you to kind of draw what might be one example of what some other communities do here. So there's a town administration engages in a franchise agreement with the cable company, and as one of the conditions, they're allowed by the FCC to require that the cable company help them provide PEG access, again, for public, education, and government information services. And it's really up to the franchising agent, which in this case is the town administration, to figure out how to use that. They have a lot of latitude. So one way they can set things up is that the town can run the government channel itself. The cable company can provide cable access for schools to provide the educational channel. And it's very typical that the town administration would contract a third party to run the public channel, but it's legal for them to run it themselves, subject to the federal requirement that they do not make any content-based limitations to what the public can put on that channel. They are allowed legally to have a reasonable allocation of times, and they're allowed to require minimum production standards, and depending how those are applied, you could see that, some people might not be happy with the result. Now, one thing that I don't like about this approach, and I like about the current CCTV approach, is you notice here there's a division of video content creation, distribution into three separate groups. There's no commonality. And in 41 years of working in the engineering profession, I've learned that keeping up with and making the most of technological change is seldom easy, and it's never automatic, And the best way to assure success is to have a critical mass of talented people working together as a focused team. So if we look at our current situation, it's roughly this, where all of the channels in terms of creation of the content, editing, distribution, et cetera, can be worked on by a focused single group, which is the CCTV nonprofit organization, and they provide services for the school too, et cetera. So what is the proposed change by the town administration? It's basically to cancel the contract with CCTV and make this into a town department. At least that's my understanding of what it is. And I see a couple problems with this that I'd like the town to consider. One of them has to do with independence and freedom of public access, appearance of conflict of interest, et cetera. Another one has to do with resilience and how this will be maintained in the future. So again, what I'm kind of saying here, sorry, I know the mic is a little tricky here, is that, faced with rapidly developing technologies, new challenges to democracy, where in the public sphere should we position our critical mass of communication expertise and resources, for video content creation, editing, distribution, training of the public in these important skills so they can do their own, presentations, advocacy, including on, hot political topics, et cetera, in order to best serve our public interest. Okay, why is this called independence of the press? Well, there's an aspect of this that I think is critically important. We live in a democracy where some important freedoms are freedom to participate in government and freedom from excess control by our government. How do we maintain these freedoms? Citizens need independent information from multiple sources. For local democracy, you need independent local sources. You need to know what's going on in the town. There's lots of committees, lots of issues, lots of departments, individual, commercial enterprises doing this and that, et cetera. So if we look at what some of these sources are, well, the town has a great website. The town's committees and boards and whatever provide agendas, minutes. They have open meetings. There's town publications, et cetera. That's really important, and that's great. There's local commercial media like the Concord Journal, the Concord Patch, et cetera. And CCTV provides, and I hope that in the future this kind of thing can even have much greater important content. It provides for a non-commercial, local-focused media in a day when, local commercial media is being challenged and people need more information. A lot is going on. There's an advisory committee which has been formed by the select board, which I think is a great idea. And if we have an independent CCTV, an advisory committee can do a number of really beneficial things. It can act as a liaison between the independent CCTV and town government. It can monitor and report on CCTV compliance with various regulations and fairness policies. It can also help CCTV with identifying and implementing advantageous new communications technologies. However, with an advisory committee without an independent CCTV, that is, with PEG access run by town administration, it cannot make the PEG department independent of administration control or influence. Okay? So if an independent CCTV wants to record any kind of public meeting, the Massachusetts Open Meeting Law guarantees their right to do that. Now, we have a town management select board that is very much in favor right now of broadcasting, recording and broadcasting as many meetings as possible. But we have to think not just for the moment, but for the whole future. There's nothing that in the current or in the situation where we don't have an independent PEG access or CCTV or media kind of public media access program to prevent future government from simply saying we don't have the money to do it, there's too many conflicts, we prioritize these meetings over others. There are a couple other considerations I'd like to just lay on the table. One of them is financial. If town government runs PEG access and Comcast funding decreases, which, the cable company in this case is the source of funds that the town uses to contract with CCTV, if that funding decreases, will the access services be reduced, or will taxes be used to pay for that? An independent nonprofit, in my opinion, might more readily obtain grant funding or other voluntary contributions from concerned parties to maintain or even expand service, which is what I would hope we would see in the future. I think this kind of local content generation service is extremely important, and it requires expertise. Further, there are potential legal concerns. If the town runs PEG access, I wonder whether we would increase risk of the town having to defend against litigation relating to FCC regulations, libel, apparent conflicts of interest, etc. And PEG dollars can't pay for the town's legal defense. To summarize, I think we currently have the best model. It provides independence, concentrated expertise, and a core nucleus around which future expanded and improved services can be developed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any questions or clarifications requested? Peggy?
Hello.
Be sure to turn on the mic when you,
Yeah, and I'll turn this one off.
yeah.
I'm actually not going to comment on this, although I thought it was
Peggy?
quite well.
You have to
I'm not going to
introduce
comment on
yourself.
that. I'm Peggy Wargelin, 97 Hillside Ave. There are now 3 of us who have been appointed to the
Speak into the microphone.
I'm sorry. There are now 3 of us who have been appointed to the Cable Access Committee. It is a committee that can have 7 people, but must have 4 before we can meet. So if anyone is interested in being the 4th, 5th, 6th, or 7th member of that committee, please turn in a card for the green card to the town.
Thank you. Doing our job for us. Tanya? Turn it on. It's on the top. Just yeah,
Oh,
there you go.
thanks, yeah.
Yep.
So, yeah, I have a concert this Saturday, so Mark did our presentation, thanks, Mark. I just want to emphasize in the detail about appearance of conflict of interest if the town administration is in charge of the PAC channel, whether it's the government channel or the public access channel. Because as Mark mentioned, if a certain government meeting is not recorded or broadcast for whatever reason, there will always be the question, were they trying to downplay something that went on at that meeting, no matter that anybody can go to those open meetings and record it for themselves. And for the citizen programs, there might be a question of, again, conflict of interest if a citizen wants to broadcast something that is in a criticism of something going on in town, of something going on in our committees. And if that particular kind of program can't be banned, content can't be banned, but it can be delayed, scheduled at a weird hour, and again, there can always be the appearance of conflict of interest. I think it is very valuable to have this media outlet available to the public as a public resource for purely independent broadcasting. Just wanted to emphasize that aspect. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Is there anybody else that would like to ask a question, clarification? Select board? Anybody? My fellow? Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Mark. All right. So we're moving on to Article 22, which is going to be, here's our able town manager, alcohol beverage bylaw amendment.
Chris Whalen, Town Manager. I live at 1935 Main Street. Is the mic on? Got it. It's on. I think it's on. Okay. I'm here to talk about alcoholic beverages. Let me see. The language of Article 22 that you see in the warrant provides the full text of the town's alcoholic beverage bylaw, which was adopted in May of 1974 and was amended in 1981 to add police enforcement and related consumption of alcohol in vehicles, but it's largely been the same since 1974 and served the town well. The proposed amendment would label the current bylaw as Section 1 and would add a new Section 2. And that Section 2 reads as you see here, which is included in the warrant, notwithstanding the provisions of Section 1 of the bylaw, the Select Board may, to the extent permitted by state law, issue a one-day special license for the sale or service of alcohol on property owned by the town and which is subject to the control of the Select Board or the town manager in connection with a community event or celebration being held on such town property. So this bylaw change would not impact land that's controlled by the school committee, the Natural Resources Commission, the Cemetery Committee, or the Water Commissioners, Sewer Commissioners. So it's really just the general land that's held by or under the custody of the Select Board for general municipal purposes. And there's two goals that we have in mind, or I had in mind in recommending this article, that the Select Board consider adding this to the warrant. The first is that to seek specific authorization to allow the issuance of one-day licenses to lessees of town property to support their fundraising activities consistent with past practice. Two organizations in particular, 51 Walden Street, the Center for the Arts, and the Emerson Umbrella, have long received multiple one-day liquor licenses to have fundraising events or to, during performances to serve alcohol during performances, and this has helped support their work to support the arts. It's contrary to the bylaw, so I think those licenses have been issued for more than 30 years to those two establishments and perhaps others, not strictly in conformance with the law. So one of my objectives in proposing this is to allow that to be done in a lawful manner. But the second purpose is that for the first time since the adoption of the bylaw in '74, this would allow the Select Board to issue a license for the service of alcohol at community events, such as the Jazz Fest that was held last June. It was a very successful Jazz Fest, and the promoters are hoping to make it even bigger, adding more acts and make it more fun for the community. And there was a discussion about having it in a town parking lot, the Kaiser Road parking lot, or at Emerson Field, or some other location, but the bylaw prohibited the service of alcohol even during such community events as this. The organizers of the Jazz Fest have scheduled it once again, the second anniversary concert for June 9th. They've added some additional acts, and I think it'll be a good event. And they find that it would be helpful to have the ability to serve alcohol. The Select Board routinely issues one-day special licenses to nonprofit organizations and other entities that want to serve alcohol for a special event. They rigidly regulate the sale of that alcohol to certified servers, bartenders. The alcohol is rigidly controlled by the vendor and so forth. So we think this is a good opportunity, and we're submitting this to town meeting for your consideration. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions, clarifications about my fellow Select Board members? No? Okay.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we're at Article 23, which is also a citizen's petition article on community resilience goals. Lori Gil-Pizares.
Okay, is that better? It moves the town take action to maintain and regenerate our natural environment in order to protect our community and mitigate and build resilience to climate disruption by, first of all, urging the town or the select board to designate the identification and implementation of cost-effective solutions to mitigate weather impacts a top priority, and secondly, urging a committee be formed by fall 2018 to address town resilience. Next slide. Or I do the next slide. Or do you do the next slide? That way. On the right. That was a tactical error. I didn't bring my glasses. Apologies. My first time using this advancer. Oh. Okay, moving right along. I think. Okay. So what is the difference between resilience and sustainability? Resilience is defined as the capacity to respond to a disturbance by resisting damage and recovering quickly. And in the case of natural disturbances, it could be floods, heat waves, water shortages, anything along those lines. Whereas sustainability refers to meeting the needs of people today in a way that leaves future generations the ability to meet their own needs. And sequestering, there's a lot of overlap between the two. Sequestering CO2, for instance, in soil is both a sustainability measure and an example of building resilience. Awareness is growing that building resilience at the community level is critical. This is a quote from the Post-Carbon Institute. The sustainability challenges of yesterday have become today's resilience crises. National and global efforts have failed to stop climate change. I'm not going to read the rest of that. It goes on to say we must now confront these and other increasingly complex problems by building resilience at the community level. And I just want to point out that the USDA, for instance, is promoting healthy soil, which means that soil that contains a high CO2 content in the form of carbon as a step to prepare for natural disasters. So why vote yes? The article recognizes the need for a comprehensive resilience plan and goals for our community. As a former boss used to tell me, if you don't know where you're going, you'll never get there. The article asks the town to take the most cost-effective steps to build resilience to climate change and to make resilience a top priority for the town. Nature-based solutions are generally more cost-effective and less expensive than man-made ones. Most importantly, healthy natural systems afford protection that help us weather, so to speak, the extreme heat, precipitation, drought, and severe storms that we can realistically expect in the future. Protecting, preserving, and restoring natural systems may sound simple, but it's complicated. Much of our land, soil, and waterways have already been degraded by the way we have managed them in the past. The article recognizes this complexity and the need for new models. We need to find new ways to do things. Town management took a serious and responsible approach to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and recognized the complexity and need for new models by first appointing a committee and then a special task force to advise the town on energy goals and actions. A similar approach and actions are needed to manage our natural systems while we still have a significant amount of functional, and I stress functional, open space, and natural resources that can help protect us from climate disruption right here in our own community. So what are the predicted impacts of climate change? An assessment conducted by a 13-town group in the Minuteman region called MAGIC identified 4 areas of concern. They include ecological systems, agriculture, the economy and built environment, and public health. We need only look at the first area, impact on ecological systems, to understand how serious the risks of climate change are. Degradation of natural systems will result in decreased drinking water quality and quantity, in increased flooding, in loss of habitat and recreation areas. Now, by the way, many people think that each storm brings new water to the planet. That's not the case. There's a finite amount of water on the earth, and the amount of drinkable water is actually quite small. Water simply cycles on the earth between land, soil, waterways, and the atmosphere. So the next 2 slides I'm going to go through quickly. They're just examples of extreme weather events we've seen recently. These are both come from 2016. The first is the drought in the summer of 2016, which put enormous stress on our crops. And the second is the tornado that hit Concord, basically tornadoes being high windstorms, and they're predicted to also intensify and grow in frequency. And so there's something we have to be prepared for. There are many factors that support the need for Article 23. Communities, including Concord, are facing enormous challenges. At the top of the list is the need to balance growth with the ability to provide food and water for residents. How resilient are our food production and water management systems? We Concordians are very fortunate. About 46 to 60% of our land is open space, and 38% of our land is permanently protected. But does that mean we no longer need to be concerned with protecting more open space? It seems important to consider land from the perspective of resilience before we make decisions. Every day, we watch as trees and sometimes sizable swaths of forest cover are removed and replaced with structures, impermeable pavement, and grass, all of which reduce resilience. Unfortunately, as we lose open space, we lose these free services, or the functions that healthy soil, vegetation, and trees provide. An example is the fact that trees and vegetation, with the help of healthy soil, slow down the runoff of stormwater. That runoff, as we know, picks up and carries pollutants into our waterways. Listed here are free services that trees provide. I'm going to focus just on the area highlighted in yellow. Trees provide habitat and store carbon, and as I mentioned, they also help reduce runoff and flooding by consuming water. An amazing statistic, a mature, and I quote, a mature oak tree can consume 40,000 gallons of rainfall in a year. That's significant. So just think of what the effect of all of our trees might be. Other free services include water purification and recharge of aquifers, both extremely important, critical issues in Concord. And there's more. The MAGIC Climate Resilience Report points out that many current state and local regulations do not take climate change into account. In terms of water protection, the report states this: the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act and the Rivers Protection Act do not protect all aspects of water resources, and at this time do not account for changes that may accompany climate change. And my final point is that it's important that we address all areas of impact at the same time to make sure that when we choose a solution for one, it doesn't have negative repercussions on another. So the next few slides are just predictions of whether I'm going to fly through these. The first one is precipitation, and our area has experienced a 70% increase in heavy rainfall events. That's remarkable. We're seeing that already, and the prediction is that we'll have even heavier, more frequent, and higher intensity storms as time goes on. Now, paradoxically, we also may see drought. You might ask, well, how can we see drought when we're getting all this rain? Well, an understanding of natural systems demonstrates how this can happen. And finally, the heat. We know that our climate today is very similar to the historical climate in New York, and it's just moving further south. The final point I'd like to make is that the Magic Vulnerability Assessment Report pointed out resilience issues Concord will need to address. One of these is drinking water. The report indicates that drinking water systems in the Magic area are highly vulnerable to climate change. Concord is one of 3 towns withdrawing groundwater at a faster rate than it is being regenerated. And this is what that looks like. So Concord is in the middle, the large area, mostly orange, a little bit of blue. That's Concord, and there are 2 other towns, I believe they're Maynard and Sudbury, and we're the only 3 towns in our region that are depleting water more quickly than we're regenerating it. But there's good news. There's good news because we know how to restore aquifers. And the even better news is that we have time right now to take action and do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lori. Are there any questions from my fellow select board members? Okay. How about from the public? Anybody have any questions for Lori before she leaves? Okay. Thank you very much. All right. All right, so we're moving on to Article 28, which is to appropriate funds for 2229 Main Street, the NMI StarMet Superfund site redevelopment. And Pam? Pam,
Hi.
are you chair of the 2229? Too many twos.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Committee?
Is that on? I'm Pam Rockwell, 1810 Main Street, speaking for the 2229 Main Street Oversight Committee. Article 28 appropriates $25,000 to create a redevelopment plan for the property at 2229 Main Street in West Concord. This property at 2229 Main Street is 46 acres nestled in Thoreau Hills across Main Street from the ice rink near Forest Ridge Road and the Acton Stop and Shop. It's previously the site of Nuclear Metals, which was a defense contractor that worked with exotic metals. And it's zoned for light industrial and residential uses. There's a map of the site so you can see how it's close to Acton and to our bus depot across the river. So you might remember the big buildings on the hill, and you might have heard a lot about StarMet through the years, me at meetings saying horrible things. But to quote my favorite Jedi, everything you know might be wrong now. In 1997, all of the contaminated sludge in the old holding basin was dug up and shipped away. So there's just a big empty hole now. In 2001, the site became a Superfund site. And during the initial investigation of the site, barrels of beryllium shavings were discovered. But they were dug up and they're gone now too. In 2006, all the uranium metals being stored inside the buildings were packed up and shipped away. And in 2008, the fire department directed the EPA to do an emergency cleanup, and a whole bunch of chemicals inside the buildings were packed up and shipped away. And the beginning was the process was started to remove the buildings at the site. In April of 2015, our town meeting voted to take ownership of the site once EPA decided that it had to be cleaned up to a residential level. And in September of 2015, EPA did just that. They created a record of decision that said that the site would be cleaned up to a residential level, and that the solvents at the site would be pumped and treated, and that the holding basin would be surrounded and protected deep underground where it can't be reached by normal excavation materials. So in 2015, the buildings at the site, thanks to our fire department and the EPA, were removed. These buildings were knocked down, and this is what the site looks like today. This is a big, flat, open space ready to be redeveloped. Last year, a water cleanup started at the site. A pump and treat system is actually installed in Acton on the site of the old gravel pit behind Stop and Shop was started. So what you need to know now about this site, what is true about this site today, is that the risks at this site have been largely eliminated, and the final risks are being taken care of by the implementation of the record of decision. This site is going to be a a safe place to work and to live and to play. When I hear fire engines go by my house on Main Street, I no longer worry that they are going to Starmet. There is nothing left there that could be a problem for the fire department. What is left is making sure that the soil is safe enough to grow vegetables. The source materials that are too deep to dig out are surrounded by concrete, so they can never contaminate the groundwater. And I think you just heard about how precious groundwater is in the last article that was up there. So now our problem in the site, our old problem site, is really now an opportunity. The EPA is negotiating the funding contract called a consent decree to do the rest of the cleanup. As soon as the consent decree is signed, remediation planning starts, and the site could theoretically be substantially cleaned up in 6 years. The consent decree could be signed tomorrow. So why do we need to create a redevelopment plan right now? To show our commitment to owning this site and to leverage the remediation design to fit our plans. This site is going to be cleaned up, and somebody is going to redevelop it. We have an opportunity to control the speed and the character of this cleanup. Our select board is a little hesitant to take ownership of the site before the groundwater protection systems are put into place. But planning the redevelopment shows our commitment to becoming effective stewards of this site. EPA wants there to be a responsible owner of this site who can make sure that sampling wells and the underground containment structure are not disturbed. In the past, the Pentagon took 3 years to sign the consent decree for those buildings to be removed, and only signed up once the site had been abandoned by Starmet. We don't want them to have any excuse to put off the rest of the cleanup any longer. A plan will encourage them to sign on the dotted line. And what if the consent decree is signed tomorrow? Then the remediation design would begin. A reuse plan can inform the remediation design so that access to roads and containment structures can be placed in convenient locations. Remediation can be planned so that certain parts of the property are available for immediate use. That sounds kind of loose, but the reality is, for instance, the old holding basin is going to have to get capped. And when it's capped, if there's no redevelopment plan, there's going to be a nice grassy field put on top of that. But what if we wanted to park our dump trucks on top of that? Remember how the difference in the cost between capping the landfill at the high school, how much it was going to cost to cap it if we just had a grassy field, and how much more it was going to cost if we were going to put a parking lot on top of it? If we say we want a parking lot on top of it, that we want it to be packed down deep enough for a dump truck, then we can say that now, and when they do the first capping of the site, it will be done correctly. There's also a lot of this site that is not contaminated at all, and you can access that from Thoreau Hills, from walking paths, from conservation land that the town owns adjacent to this site, from Forest Ridge Road. We could start using some of those sites now. Walking trails, environmental access. There's a beautiful bog at the site. There are plenty of things that we could do with this site almost immediately before the whole cleanup is done. So there's a real advantage to doing this now. So I spoke to the finance committee and they said, well, $25,000 doesn't pay for much. But a lot of the work has already been done for this site. The first thing is that we have a whole list of needs coming out of the Comprehensive Land Long-Range Planning Commission right now. There's a whole list of things we could do at this site. And the Environmental Protection Agency also has contractors on staff or on their payroll to help us with this. So in fact, $25,000 is really a person to leverage the resources we already have to do this work. And we might not have to spend all of that, because if the resources are leveraged well, if we can identify our needs quickly, then maybe it won't take that long. This site is in the heart of a vibrant residential neighborhood. We could put a transportation center there. We could put solar or wind power generation there. We could put sports fields. We could put recreation buildings there. We could put town offices, facilities there. We can put housing there. It is going to be cleaned up, safe enough for housing. We could also put educational access for kids who want to study the bog or get out in the world. There are a lot of opportunities at this site, and it would be really nice if that were our town getting to take advantage of those opportunities. In summary, if we develop reuse plans for this site now, we can encourage a quicker cleanup of the site, and we can leverage the restoration of the site to make sure that our redevelopment goes our way. Any questions?
Thank you. First, I want to ask my select board members, any questions? Steve?
Yeah, Pam, which Jedi Knight made that quote?
That was Luke, yeah, sorry.
Luke? Really? Okay, all right. Thank you so much to the committee for all your hard work with keeping an eye on the EPA. I don't think we'd have such an effective cleanup without your efforts, so thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
And I think the presentation's spot on. It's talking about the successes of the progress that's been happening there at the site. There are real changes that are really cleaning up the area, and I think that's the best way to present to the public, is the timing for planning is perfect to start those next steps, because it's really the EPA wants to design the final work on the record of decision on what happens at the site. So if we let them know, well, we'd like to do this at this area and some other activity here, they can do that and enhance or support the direction we'd like to go. So I think it's not a bad thing to have a nice plan that's looking into the future. And I know Concord really believes in that, and I think we should support that.
Anything else?
Thanks. Any other public comments, questions, clarifications? Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to Article 29, which is to accept Mass General Law 90, Section 17, limiting the traffic speed. Chris?
Chris Whalen, Town Manager, 1935 Main Street again. The Municipal Modernization Act of 2016 was adopted by the Massachusetts legislature and allowed municipalities to make a lot of decisions in a wide variety of areas, including finance and transportation, that we want to take advantage of. So Article 29 proposes that the town vote to accept the provisions of General Laws Chapter 90, Section 17C, to establish a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit in thickly settled areas or business districts in the town. This is a bad slide that the moderator won't like, so I will put fewer words on it. Exactly. So, but I wanted to highlight the fact that our article allows the town to, the method for accepting the statute is to have the town meeting vote to accept the statute, and that would establish a 25-mile-an-hour zone in Concord, and we must notify the Mass Department of Public Works or Highway Department when that occurs. And let me see. So there's a description there of the business districts and thickly settled areas, which statewide are now 30 mile an hour. The state set the 30 mile an hour speed limit for thickly settled areas, and that would remain in place. If we do nothing, it will stay at 30 miles per hour. This allows the town to reduce it to 25 miles per hour in some areas. So the statutory speed limit only exists in the absence of a special speed regulation. There are many areas in Concord, many of our roads have been posted by the state as special speed regulated areas. So Lowell Road, you'll see, is 40 miles per hour. That was approved by the state, and only the state can change it. This bylaw or this acceptance of this statute won't change that. We have other areas where 25 mile an hour speed limits have been approved by the state. It also wouldn't approve that. So it's important to know about half of the roads in town do not have a state-approved speed regulation, and therefore the 25 mile an hour limit would apply on those roads. Here's a map of those roads, and I'll put this, Erin will post this online tomorrow, and so you'll be able to look at your particular road and see if there's a speed regulation. But you can see Route 2 is the purple one through the middle there, that's 45 mile an hour, and Route 2A way over on the left. Lowell Road is a dark blue, that's the 40 mile an hour, excuse me, Route 2 is 45. The yellow Farmers Cliff Road off of Lowell Road is 15, and that's a state-approved 15 mile an hour speed limit, which might surprise some people that there is such a thing. So it's all the roads that are not shown in color there, which currently have a 30 mile an hour limit, state sanctioned, which would go to 25 miles an hour. I think Concord has the misfortune, perhaps, of being a cut-through community when either Route 2 or Route 3, in particular, are clogged with traffic. There's software programs that tell people exactly how to cut through the side streets in our community, often at a fast rate of speed to get to where they're going in a faster way. So we see those cars. They don't start in Concord. They don't end in Concord. They're just trying to get through Concord as quickly as possible. So I think that this could help us with that problem that we have of excessive speed on our roads, particularly even the smaller residential roads where you wouldn't expect to have traffic. And the communities that have acted in the past, in the calendar 2017, in the short period of time that this has been available to communities, the list is here. Cambridge was first in 2016 in adopting it, but many other communities have done so since. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the select board? What about the public? Anybody have a question up? Sir, can you come up to the microphone here and identify yourself?
Now it's on? Oh, it's on. Okay. Thank you very much. I'm Richard Follander, 399 Old Bedford Road. I support the adoption of Article 29 as the beginning of what I hope will be a coordinated town effort to make Concord roads safer for everyone. I had intended to put this petition article on the town warrant to reduce speed limits, but did not go forward after finding out about the Select Board's article and also discovering the rather complicated world of traffic regulation that Chris alluded to. I spoke to our town moderator about offering an amendment to the article, but was advised that any such amendment would be ruled beyond the scope of the article. And so I'm here at the hearing to support this article while highlighting its limitations. I think we can all agree that slowing down cars and trucks will improve safety for all people who use our roads, especially neighbors living on busy through streets, bicyclists, and pedestrians. I've lived on Old Bedford Road for 25 years. I know that's hard to believe. How can I be that old? But during that time, there's been a significant increase in traffic volume. Congestion at rush hours and excessive speed at other times make getting out of a driveway a harrowing experience. I've also seen a tremendous increase in the number and character of bicyclists. In recent years, the spandex-clad racers have been supplemented by more and more ordinary folks. Families with cycling novices, older riders with baskets and bags, middle schoolers with their friends, tourists with maps and apps. All of these people have the right to the road and deserve our protection. Reducing vehicle speeds will encourage more people to get out of their cars and ride bikes. In a wider context, bicycling complements Concord's green energy initiatives, promotes exercise for a healthy community, and benefits our local retail economy by making Concord an even more attractive recreational, historical, and artistic destination. There are additional ways to promote cycling, such as roadway markings and more bike racks, but slowing down vehicles is a key priority. In regard to pedestrians, vehicle speed, compounded by today's distracted driving, is the walker's greatest risk. This is especially true at busy intersections. With both an aging population and many young families, I believe the town should undertake additional measures to improve pedestrian crossings and to refurbish and extend sidewalks. However, as mentioned in the warrant and by Chris, Article 29 will not reduce speed limits on the roads with the quote-unquote special speed regulations. I think you saw the map that it's a significant, any street you think of as busy, this 25-mile-an-hour speed limit does not affect that road. It was explained to me that in order to reduce speed limits on these roads, an engineering study is required by the state Department of Transportation. And in many cases, speed limits could actually be increased. Now, how, you wonder, is this possible? Well, if I have this right, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, according to current engineering practices, if 85% of vehicles are traveling the road at a given speed, it would be an impediment to free flow of traffic to slow the speed in an area that isn't demonstrably unsafe. A more holistic view reveals problems with this approach. We all know that no one is ticketed for going 5 miles an hour over the speed limit, maybe not even 10, which means a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit is really 40 miles an hour. This fact can then be reflected during an engineering study when most vehicles will be going over the posted speed limit. I guess during the study, maybe we could have somebody there with a radar gun. And besides, which engineer in the sky, or should I say on the road, decided the 35 mile per hour, really 40, on Bedford Street, for example, is the perfect compromise between the competing interests of commuters passing through town and people enjoying the local scenery. As a cyclist, I feel a brush with death as trucks squeeze past me full steam ahead. As a grandparent, I dash across the road, pushing a stroller to reach the sidewalk on the other side. As a motorist, I'm often tailgated or passed in no passing zones when I try to maintain the posted speed. It makes me wonder who determines what is unsafe: engineers committed to traffic volume or citizens committed to quality of life? In that debate, I believe residents of a city or town should be given the strongest voice. Therefore, I urge the Select Board to go beyond Article 29. They'll have to do it in the coming year, I suppose. The Board could work with the State Department of Transportation to revise current special speed regulations, perhaps to a maximum of 30 miles per hour throughout town and a maximum of 25 miles per hour in all thickly settled ways. Not thickly settled. I mean, you got to admit, that is one of the coolest things about New England. If you've lived your whole life, you don't realize no one else in the country knows what thickly settled means. If that approach is not feasible, I urge the Select Board with our state representatives to propose state legislation giving such authority to local communities, similar to what has happened with the legislation that would be voted on in this article. But before getting to specific legislation, perhaps the Select Board could consider empowering a Safe Roads for All committee to address both speed limits and to propose comprehensive traffic safety measures for all people. The committee could issue a report with recommendations for the 2019 annual town meeting. I thank you, the Select Board, and for taking this first step, or perhaps pedal, on a path toward a safer and more welcoming Concord for all the people who make their way around our town, and not just those passing through.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have anything to add to this discussion at this point? Okay. Dee? Have you mastered the mic?
I hope so. I was told you should hold it like this so that it's clearer. One question that I have, I understand the need for the 25 mile per hour, and you talked about ways and how it's redirecting traffic in town, and nobody can go 25 miles an hour during rush hour. I'm wondering if the town has considered something similar to what you did on Kais Road, which is as it meets up with Main Street, you can only turn right during certain hours of the day. So it limits the backup of traffic from Kais Road, et cetera, and trying to make left-hand turns at an inappropriate time. And I'm wondering if you have thought about that approach for helping to control the ways through town.
Microphone. The town engineer, Bill Renault, is here. I know we've had a few requests, such as from River Street, near the river, where a lot of commuters are cutting through River Street when Elm Street gets backed up, and they've asked, I think, if we'd consider a no left turn coming out of River Street on the south side.
It's the same thing on Thoreau Street. Number one, students are trying to get to school, and so there's always some traffic on Thoreau Street. But then cars also will turn up Middle Street, and I'm challenged with names of streets in that area, but they're always zigzagging around, and those are real residential streets, with little kids out playing and things. So I was just wondering if you had considered that.
Sure. So typically, any road that is being used as a cut-through to get off of an arterial, if we receive a resident petition, that comes to the traffic management group, and then the traffic management group reviews traffic counts during, usually the AM and PM peaks, and if we find that there is an increase, we would look to implement one of those turn restrictions. They eventually go to the Board of Selectmen. They start out as a trial through the police department. The police chief has authority from the select board to implement them on a temporary basis, and then usually after about 60 days, we evaluate it, and if we find that there's an improvement, it gets adopted by the select board.
I hope everyone is watching this tonight because that's new information, and I'm wondering if residents really do know that they can submit these petitions, or how do they learn about it? How can we get them that information?
Well, this starts it, and we'll have to take that under consideration. Thanks, Dee. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. All right. So we're welcoming the Board of Health up to discuss bylaw amendment number 30 to prohibit all types of non-medical marijuana establishments as defined by Mass General Law, Section 94G, subsection 1. And for those of you who did not join us at our marijuana forum, this article is one of 3 that the town will be looking at. We heard about the tax at the FinCom hearings, and this is what we often refer to as opt-out.
Okay. Ray Considine, 133 Ursnack Hill Road, Chair of the Board of Health, and along with Board Member Dr. Deborah Green, we will explain Article 30 to you tonight. The article is a proposal to amend the town's general bylaws by adding a new section regulating marijuana establishments. Now, I'm not going to read the entire text on the slide, but the proposed bylaw would prohibit all non-medical marijuana establishments in Concord. The Board of Health is sponsoring Article 30 out of concern for protecting the public's health, and we're here tonight to share some of those concerns with you. First, I'm going to do a brief background on how we got here. In November 2016, Massachusetts voters approved Question 4, which legalized the adult use of marijuana and created marijuana establishments. Concord voters also approved Question 4 by a very thin margin. There were 91 votes, or less than 1% of the 11,047 votes cast that were voted in favor of the marijuana question. The legislation as written automatically allows recreational marijuana in every city and town in the Commonwealth beginning July 1st of this year. If a town wishes to opt out of that, of allowing the sale, manufacturing, and the cultivation of marijuana, it has to do so by a vote, by amending its general bylaws at a town meeting. So if Article 30 passes at town meeting, we must also hold a second vote on an identical ballot question at a town election, which will likely be I believe it's a special town meeting that will happen in May. Is that right?
That's correct. And that second vote is necessitated by the fact that we voted to legalize marijuana in 16.
Right, correct. So the Board of Health recognizes that legalization is a very complex issue with a range of public opinion on legalization. Although a narrow margin of Concord voters approved question 4, the board believes that a full implication of legalizing marijuana and allowing retail sale may not be really well understood by the voters in Concord. So the board has spent the past 6 months looking into this issue to understand how it may play out and what are the implications for the town. Part of the process was waiting for the Cannabis Control Commission to issue their regulations, which they will do later this month. I believe March 15th, they're on schedule to issue their regulations. But based on what we've learned already, we believe legalization presents significant public health and public safety concerns for the town. We want to share those concerns with you this evening so that you can decide whether you want to go forward with allowing marijuana sales or, in fact, limit some of those sales in Concord. So just to clarify any confusion, we are not proposing to prohibit the personal use as allowed under state law. And you can see that each individual is allowed 6 plants or 12 per household. Our proposal only applies to licensed marijuana businesses. So what would be prohibited by Article 30? The article would prohibit the retail sales of marijuana in any form, from storefronts to cafes, as well as cultivation and manufacturing, and any other licensed establishments that the town may elect to license. So all would be prohibited by Article 30. The Cannabis Control Commission regulations would allow a wide variety of uses, such as storefront retail, or better known as pot shops, bakeries, food stores. There could also be restaurants and bars and marijuana cafes that would be, that are legalized right now in the regulations. And those would be devoted, what they're called the social consumption of marijuana. And those are simply places licensed to sell a single serving of marijuana. So you can imagine the unlimited nature of that here in town. In fact, any retail establishment could potentially be licensed to sell marijuana products, such as edibles, vaping liquids, which, you know, as you've seen in the newspaper, is really a big issue and popular among teens, really across the country, and to some extent here in Concord. And also marijuana-infused products like lotions and oils. All of that would be allowed under this, these regulations. Home delivery will also be allowed, and that is not going to happen until 2019, but home delivery of marijuana products is something that cannot be prohibited by a local vote. We have no control over that. That's a state regulation. So even if Concord votes to opt out of allowing marijuana establishments, those of you who wish to purchase products, you could still have access to do so no matter what. As the board considered what might be allowed, we had a particular concern about what is called mixed-use establishments. And that's where marijuana can be consumed or used socially. And these types of establishments greatly increase the number of settings where marijuana may be purchased and consumed, and really opens the door, in our mind, to many health risks. Persons under 21 may be allowed to enter these establishments, increasing the likelihood that younger people coming into, say, a restaurant would be exposed to marijuana consumption, which really, in our mind, changes the perception of risk and sends the message that marijuana use is really harmless, and that the idea of changing social norms is a real concern of ours. The second concern is that establishments that serve alcohol will also be able to sell marijuana products. Now, albeit they have to have some kind of physical divide between where the bar is and where the consumption may occur, but that is that idea, that possibility of co-location increases public safety risks, as consumers may have a much higher likelihood of driving under the influence. The question that has come up about why we decided to propose prohibiting all types of non-medical marijuana products. The board felt it was really inconsistent to, on one hand, prohibit retail, but allow manufacturing or allow cultivation. We didn't want to be in a position of picking the winners and losers in the marijuana industry. Since we have really concerns of recreational marijuana that are very much general in nature. At the time that the board submitted our town meeting article, the CCC regulations, that's the Cannabis Control Commission regulations, had yet to be finalized. They're in the final stages now. We know now that those regulations will allow various forms of marijuana businesses, but it is still really unclear how the regulations are going to be implemented. There's a lot of doubt about that, even with the draft regulations that we've already seen. So it seems, in our mind, prudent to prohibit all types of marijuana businesses for now. This decision could change at a future town meeting if residents decide that they, in time, want to allow some or all uses of marijuana products, that is the retail, the manufacturing, the cultivation, and the testing. That always can happen at a subsequent town meeting. So I'd like to use the rest of our time just to turn it over to Dr. Green to talk about the health implications of marijuana use for adults and for children.
Thank you. I'm Deb Green, 341 Madison Drive. Okay, got it. So as Ray said, 8 states in the District of Columbia have legalized recreational marijuana since 2014. Colorado was the first state to do that in 2014, and sales began the year after that. So we do not have a lot of data on the effects of legalization, and the research is still evolving. But we do have 3 very good studies, and the research is concerning. People may wonder why we're still learning about marijuana. I just want to point out that this is not the same marijuana that was available 50 years ago. The active ingredient in marijuana that gives people that high or that euphoria is called THC. 50 years ago, it was about 3 to 4% in cannabis. Today's products are averaging about 18% and steadily increase as people are increasingly looking for more of that high. And synthetic products are even 100 times more potent than that. So I think even more reason to be cautious and learn from others' experience. As you can see, high school seniors in states with medical marijuana laws are twice as likely to have vaped marijuana and used edibles than their counterparts in states without medical marijuana. This makes sense. There's more product out there, even if it's only designed for medical use, not even states with recreational use. There's more product out there, and it gets into hands of adolescents. If you, like Ray said, don't know anything about vaping, you should. There's been great articles in the New York Times and NPR, and you should know that Massachusetts surveys show that 1/4 of our high school students have tried vaping. It's a $2.5 billion industry in the United States with no FDA regulations. In addition, edible marijuana products are extremely concerning. These can be produced to look like candy. They can look like your child's Halloween candy that they bring home. They're Sour Patch Kids, they're gummy bears, and they can obviously be deadly if they get into the wrong hands. Colorado has seen an increase in number of marijuana-related hospitalizations since 2008. It's increased steadily every single year. They've seen an increase in marijuana-related visits to the emergency departments, which concerns me. I am an emergency physician at Emerson Hospital. I've already seen overdoses. I've seen people visited the emergency department for overdoses and side effects of marijuana. Colorado saw an increase in calls to the poison control centers, distinct change in the years after they legalized marijuana, and of concern, about 40% of those calls were for edible products. There's also a large increase in the number of unintentional pediatric overdoses. As a parent, we also should note that over 11% of Colorado youth, teenagers ages 12 to 17 years old, were considered current marijuana users. And this is a big increase, over 50% increase from the national average, which is about 7%. In addition, Colorado noticed a 40% increase in the number of suspensions and expulsions from their public schools, largely secondary to marijuana use. As you might expect, marijuana causes psychomotor retardation. It slows people's reflexes down, and so not surprisingly, Colorado and Washington motor vehicle accident data has seen increase in accidents after they legalized in those states. Of concern, 20% of all traffic deaths in Colorado in 2014 were marijuana related. The year before there was legalization, the death rate was only 10%. In addition, the use of marijuana and alcohol combined increases the risk even more because alcohol increases the body's absorption of THC. So very deadly combination that Colorado is seeing. The public has a perception that marijuana use really has no risk. Unfortunately, the research is showing that this is inaccurate. There's an increased risk in development of depression and depressive disorders, of increase in social anxiety disorder in regular users, an increased incidence of suicidal ideation and suicide attempts with a higher incidence on heavy users, and an increased incidence of suicide completion. In addition, we are seeing that there is a definite addiction syndrome, a substance abuse disorder, and there's a definite withdrawal syndrome. Adults may only have a 9% risk of addiction with regular marijuana use. However, of concern is that if people start using as adolescents, their risk is actually doubled. It's 17%. For people of any age that use marijuana daily, the rate of addiction is anywhere from 25 to 50%. The adolescent brain is in a very particular crucial time of development. The prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for decision-making, impulse control, emotional maturity, actually does not finish maturing by age 25. Any parent of a teenager probably knows that already. This is a process of synaptic refinement. It's the brain's neurons are myelinating. It's setting down those final pathways for learning and behavior control. And we know that these receptors are at risk when exposed to alcohol, opiates, and marijuana. Adolescents who engage in low to moderate marijuana use experience an increase in their attention problems and academic problems when they use marijuana even monthly, and academic performance suffers in users who even use weekly. So the landscape of cannabis is changing. Unfortunately, there is a very perceived low risk of harm out there, and with the ease of availability of marijuana, this is historically connected to rising rates of substance abuse. I think our adolescents and young adults perceive marijuana as a very safe drug. They feel it's safer than opiates, they feel it's safer than alcohol, and therein lies the risk. Retail sale of marijuana would normalize this use of the drug and sort of bump it into a group with other substances such as alcohol and tobacco. But we know that the effects of those two substances, the negative impacts in our society and our families, are both well known. Some people would argue, well, if we just restrict the sale of marijuana to people over 21 or people over 25, then we can avoid all that. But we know that our teenagers and young adults get tobacco. We know that they get alcohol. So we're not really 100% successful in that respect. And society spends a significant public health and medical resources to reducing the use and health impacts of alcohol and tobacco. We spent 20 or more years trying to denormalize the use of tobacco to reduce smoking rates. So the Board of Health asked the voters of Concord why we would normalize the use of another drug like marijuana. Ray?
Thank you, Dr. Green. I hope we've started to explain and share our concerns about the legalization issue. It will ultimately be up to voters at town meeting to decide what to do, whether they want to or not, to allow the sale and production of marijuana in Concord. We'll be glad to field any questions that you might have, either from the select board or from the audience.
I see a select board member.
Yes, Ray, just a question clarifying in my own mind. I understand the way your article is written, and I don't know what kind of establishments might arise, but what about an establishment where marijuana was not sold, but food and alcohol was sold, but it was a place where you would go and use it in a social way, so there was no exchange of money, and nobody is getting paid for selling product. Is that covered by this, or?
Well, and not in a combustible sense, because there's the smoke-free workplace law in Massachusetts.
Not in a combustible.
So smoking would be regulated. Marijuana use would fall under the same statutes that pertain to.
But not edibles or?
If you were, I don't know if I have, if I can answer that. I think if you brought in a marijuana cookie and you ate it at a bar, and the bar was not providing it to you, I don't know whether the bar could control that or not. But I can't answer that at this point. It's something that perhaps we could look and get the information for you.
Well, I suppose since it isn't specifically prohibited by the bylaw that you're constructing, then it would probably be legal unless it ran afoul of some other general law or some other bylaw.
I think that it's a good point, because I think it does illustrate the concerns of the public safety concerns, that if you're consuming products and you're also consuming alcohol, it potentiates the effects, as Dr. Green pointed out, and it has implications for driving under the influence.
Thank you. Any other questions or clarifications from the public?
Yeah, I had a comment,
sorry.
Jane. Will the presentations seem pretty long to me? Is town moderator allowing you that amount of time? I mean, I think you should condense it anyway, because I was losing interest towards the end. But,
we'll have to ask the town moderator, I guess, the answer to that question.
I also think you should address the vote issue a little more diligently, or more, because, I mean, the town did vote, and you're asking the town to vote again. So to lessen the significance of that event I don't think it, well, for me, it didn't help me become convinced, you know. I think you got to respect that.
That's a good point. Thank you.
Town act. So, thanks.
Yes.
I see two gentlemen. Come up to the mic, identify yourselves, and please comment.
Hello there. My name is George Krett. Oh, it is? Yeah. I thought I heard something. Hello there. My name is George Krett, and I have to say I'm a little leery about some of the statistics that were thrown out here. For instance, just 18% THC times 100 would be 1,800%, and obviously that doesn't work. There were a lot of studies in Colorado that showed that childhood usage went down, but at the same time you would see more people hospitalized because children are willing to go to the hospital and they do not feel like they're going to be chastised or imprisoned. And I think that's something that should be also brought up, is the current risk of taking a prohibitionist response to this. And also you have the fact that Maynard's probably going to put one up and then we just lose out in tax money. That's it.
Thank you.
Garrett Whitney, Eastbridge Road. This is just a question. I'm sure you know that there's another class of marijuana products which are... yeah, I'm sure you know there's another class of marijuana products which are sort of half medical, half not. They're over-the-counter CBD oils and that sort of stuff which do not produce a high. Would this article affect those at all?
Can you explain what a CBD law is?
I'm no expert. I just know that
It doesn't apply to any medical product.
They're not medical because they're not prescribed by doctors. This language could be ambiguous, and maybe you could put an explicit statement that those aren't effective, something like that.
I'm sorry, I'd have to look into it. I'm not aware of a marijuana product that's not prescribed by a doctor, that's available over the counter.
You'll find it if you look, and I think you're getting a head nodded behind you. So
Right. Well, thank you for the point. We'll look into it and come up with an answer for that. Thank
Thanks.
you. Yeah.
Thanks. Any other questions, comments? Dean?
Hi, Dean Banfield, 73 Walden Terrace. I'm a member of the FinCom, but I'm just speaking for myself. Okay. 2 points. My sister lives in Seattle, and she does use one of these oils. It has nothing to do with getting high, but she does find some relief, and she just goes down to the dispensary, has no prescription for it, and does buy it. And so these things exist. So we are in a gray area relative to what Garrett just said. However, relative to what Steve Eng just pointed out, I think you're misrepresenting the vote in town by the way you quote it. You quote that 90 voters, blah, blah, and it's only 0.89%. Actually, there were 11,257 votes cast on this question. There were 193 votes more cast for the vote in favor. This represents 1.7%, not 0.9% or 0.8%, as you quote. So just please be accurate and don't understate it. We did vote for this, so we need to overcome that. We may, but you don't have to undercut what the town voted for. Thanks.
The data that we had came from the clerk's office, town clerk's office. But that's a good point. We'll check into that.
257 voted on the question, 193 difference.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. Any other questions or, please come up to the mic. That's right. Come on.
To follow up on the question about the vote, when would the town-wide revote be happening?
It would be a special election and it would happen after town meeting.
It would only, this would be the only thing on the ballot.
I could not possibly tell you whether that was
Okay.
true.
Is there is another election in the fall. Could the election be at the normal election time, or it has to be a special town election? Does anybody know that?
I think we have to have it within a specific time frame.
Because, a special town election is going to have an incredibly low turnout. I mean, relative to the election that Dean mentioned. I mean, that was the regular election. There will be a regular election in the fall. A special election will not be really a regular election, if you know what I mean. Just in terms of overturning what the town voted for.
Yeah, I understand
It's
what your
another issue, the same point he's making.
concern
It's
is.
kind of-
Are we clarifying something, or are we? Yeah, okay. Right. So it's unlikely that it would be a solo special town election, solo issue. Hang on.
We need to get an official ruling, but I think there, on other times that we've had this circumstance, that we are required to have an election with a certain amount of time after a town meeting. At least that's my recollection, but the town clerk is going to check on that. There is another item that if a debt exclusion for the high school, it's on the warrant as well, so it wouldn't be the only, if we did it, it wouldn't probably be the only article or only measure on the ballot. But we'll get a formal ruling from the town clerk and make sure we have a good answer to that question.
Thanks. Any other?
Hey, just a general question about, you know, we've heard a lot of statistics tonight, and I just hope people are, you know, how do we verify that, Madam Moderator? Should we footnote? Should we do something? We heard a lot of data today, and if some of it's wrong, now we got to fact check everything? I don't know. It's just a question.
Thanks. Any other?
Also, just Jane, I would be interested. Some of the statistics are compiled by the Department of Justice and Jeff Sessions. I'd be interested in what Canada had to say, and I have more trust in Trudeau than I do Jeff Sessions.
And that would be speaking as a select board member or as a resident of Concord?
As a footnote.
As a footnote. Okay. And now I see we have two Public Works Commission articles, Article 42 and 43. The first one is to authorize the Cambridge Turnpike easements. I think Bill is going to join us for both. And the second will be Article 43, the Monson Road street acceptance. Turn it on.
I'm back on. Here we go. So, good evening again. Bill Renaud, Town Engineer. Article 42 requests town meeting authorization for the acquisition of 3 easements to support the reconstruction of Cambridge Turnpike. To give you a little background, the Cambridge Turnpike Improvement Project proposes the complete reconstruction of approximately 7,000 feet of roadway from Lexington Road to Crosby Corner. The project will address the routine flooding of the roadway by raising segments of the road out of the floodplain and improving the 2 Millbrook crossings at the Millbrook Farm and at Crosby Pond. Other project highlights include the realignment of Lexington Road and Sandy Pond Road intersections to improve sight distance, the installation of a new sidewalk throughout the project corridor, as well as the reconstruction of all roadway utilities, including drainage, water main, gas main, electric, cable, and telephone. The easements requested in Article 42 are required to construct proposed roadway features that are outside of the narrow Cambridge Turnpike right-of-way. The orange section highlighted in this slide above depicts a proposed 10-foot wide easement on the Emerson House property. This easement is required to shift the proposed sidewalk to allow for the installation of a paved shoulder parking space for visitors to the Emerson House and Concord Museum. This replaces a current narrow gravel parking configuration that's shown in the slide below. The red section highlighted also depicts a variable width easement on the Concord Museum parcel. This easement supports the reconstruction of a 5-foot wide sidewalk in front of the museum. The third and final easement is located at number 22B Cambridge Turnpike, which is across from the Millbrook Farm. This easement is again required to shift the proposed sidewalk to allow for the installation of a paved shoulder parking area. This time for the customers of Millbrook Farm. Again, it replaces a narrow gravel parking area configuration. I already covered that in the photo. Public Works has coordinated and received support from the property owners for all 3 of these areas. I'd be happy to answer any questions on Article 42.
Any question from my fellow select board members? Public? Keep going.
All right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I need
Come on.
I need a quick
spoke too
switch.
soon.
Oh, we got a question?
Oh.
Okay. Carl Packard from the Finance Committee.
Sure. And just a very
Are
simple...
you speaking for the Finance Committee?
It's a finance question. It's a question. Sure. Okay, it's a very simple question. Quite often when an easement comes from, and I don't know whether these are private properties or they are, is there a cost for getting that easement? There's not, no. All of the abutters have agreed to give the easements to the town.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, on to Monson Road.
So Article
43.
43, there we go. Article 43 requests town meeting authorization for the acceptance of 746-foot extension of the Munson Road Public Way. If I bit to this one, the extension of Munson Road was approved as part of an 8-lot definitive residential subdivision by the Planning Board in February of 2013. Over 3 years after the approval, the subdivision was constructed. The Public Works Commission received a request from the developer Bentley Building Corporation in September of 2017 to lay out the way for acceptance at the 2018 town meeting. Layout by the Public Works Commission is the first step in the town's roadway acceptance process. This acceptance of Munson Road extension will include the right-of-way that's shown in red in the slide, as well as the drainage easement shown in green, an emergency access, pedestrian and utility easement that's shown in orange on the slide. The Public Works Commission voted their intention to lay out Munson Road in November of 2017. The Planning Board also provided recommendation to accept the extension as a public way in December of 2017, and the Public Works Commission completed the layout at their January 2018 meeting. The next step in the process of acceptance is the town meeting vote. Should the town approve Article 43, the Select Board would sign and record a taking document at the Registry of Deeds. I would be happy to answer any questions on Article 43.
Fellow board members? Public? Questions, thoughts? Are you rising to? No, I'm next in line. Okay. I think you're done. Thank you, Bill. All right. So I see Don Shabry. I'm going to mispronounce it, I apologize. Article 44 is a citizen's petition, moratorium on implementation of the NRC dog restrictions on conservation land.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. My name is Don Shobries, and I live at 7 Wright Farm. Okay. So this petition asks for a moratorium. It's non-binding because the authority of the NRC comes from the state and cannot be overruled by the town meeting. The proposed restrictions include requiring dogs to be on leash at Punkatassett and proposed leashing for NRC agricultural lands. So why a moratorium? A moratorium provides a cooling off period. The restrictions are extremely divisive and emotions are still running high. Enforcement is difficult without the consent of the governed, and both sides are frustrated and fatigued. So what are the points of conflict? The first 2 points are related. Dog owners are perplexed over what specific problems are being addressed. There was no problem statement in the NRC's presentation to the Select Board. There's a lack of data specific to Concord. The NRC did not share any data specific to Concord on problem areas, which makes it hard to understand their specific concerns. Multiple requests from Concord citizens for information received no response. Okay. In addition, data available to dog owners seems to contradict NRC claims. For example, the NRC claims that, quote, dogs are harassing and attacking people, unquote, on conservation lands, but Concord police data showed no dog-related complaints on conservation lands in 2017, and a 40% decrease in overall dog complaints in the past 5 years. There are conflicting interpretations of the science. There's a handout in the back of the room that's an article from the North Carolina State University News that summarizes a paper that dog owners interpret very differently than the NRC. Both sides claim it supports their position. 1,500 dog-owning households are losing a privilege they have enjoyed for decades.
They have a great sense of loss, and this really is an emotional issue to many people. Finally, there was no acknowledgement of the value of dogs and their need for off-leash exercise. According to the National Institutes of Health and the Center for Disease Control, adults and children living with dogs have healthier lives. They get fewer allergies and are better able to withstand serious diseases. A recent Swedish study found that dog owners live longer. And local vets will tell you that our dogs need exercise and off-leash socialization. So what does the moratorium allow? Well, the first thing is possible mediation by select board. Both sides are locked into a pattern of interactions. A third party could help them become more productive. It would also allow definition of the problems the NRC wants to solve, including measures of success so we can assess progress. Without this, we have no way of knowing whether the NRC's restrictions have any effect, so there's nothing to keep us from repeating this process in another year or two. The moratorium also allows collection of data specific to Concord within current budgets. No one is asking the NRC to do expensive studies. Las Cruces, New Mexico did a dog waste study for $850, which identified problem areas, proposed corrective measures, and provided a baseline for assessing progress. They're more than willing to share what they did with us. And you can, if you Google dog waste Las Cruces, New Mexico, you can see the study, and you'll learn far more about dog waste than you ever wanted to know. A similar effort could easily be part of the Ranger program. You're just adding structure and robustness, and the town spent $20,000 on that last year. In addition, Concord could leverage the citizen science phenomenon that's going across the country, where interested citizens use inexpensive equipment like game cameras to collect data and then share it via the internet. The study I mentioned earlier was done with citizen scientists who helped collect 23,000 observations. And finally, the moratorium allows time for education of dog owners to improve dog etiquette. Now, this needs to be a collaborative process to be successful. The moratorium also provides time for thoughtful mitigation of the ripple effect. So dog owners have lost 63% of off-leash access in the past 6 months, and people are responding in ad hoc ways that are not necessarily productive. For example, someone is passing out maps at Esterbrook, directing dog owners to an open space parcel in Simon Willard that is 40 times smaller. And with all seriousness, it looks like they're directing the dog owners to Tom McKean's backyard. That kind of ad hoc reaction creates more opportunities for conflict as more dogs are squeezed into less space. Okay. So that's the end of my presentation. I thank you for your attention and ask for your support. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Any of my fellow select board members have any questions? How about the public? Any thoughts or questions? Looks like you got off easy tonight.
All right.
Thank you very much. Okay. Now, Article 45, I understand, is not being moved. Is that correct? Yes. And so the last article we'll hear tonight is also a citizen petition, Article 46, the bylaw prohibiting use of gasoline-powered leaf blowers. Scott?
Scott Richardson, 260 Elsinore Street. I did have a handout in the back. If you have got a copy of it, that would be great. On the back that mentions, down at the bottom, something I call to your attention, which is the KCET report on leaf blowers. It's much more entertaining than I am. I didn't do that. The article was printed in the warrant. Town council had some word changes and some clarification on the language, basically adding now therefore except as expressly set forth below, just clarifying the dates of the phase-in of the ban, and then changing public to town-owned and the exemption, and a couple grammatical things. First, I want to thank the Select Board for your support 2 years ago with the polystyrene ban. It was challenging to address the questions you raised at this meeting 2 years ago, but it made the motion better and improved the outcome, so I thank you. You may have seen this recent news. Community action works. We know this in Concord. On some environmental topics, we have been leading edge. In others, we add our voice to a growing movement. Regarding Article 46, I want to thank the town employees, the residents, the landscapers, and the grounds managers who have discussed it with me to date. Some people have stated concerns, raised questions, and identified alternative approaches. Others are pleased that we are considering an action that they believe will improve the quality of life in Concord. I don't take any of this lightly. Any policy that alters the status quo will raise concerns that need to be addressed. But we should pass Article 46 and work through the process together and minimize the impacts wherever and whenever we can. Because it is a question of when, not if, we will stop using gas-powered leaf blowers. And the science says the sooner we stop, the better for all of us. Our town sustainability principles provide the context for Article 46. And Article 46 delivers on each of these 4 principles. Burning gasoline and oil emits CO2, and Concord committed to significant reductions in our emissions. Scientists tell us the next few years are critical. Every year we delay makes it harder to avoid dramatic consequences. Article 46 won't bend the curve of CO2 emissions on its own, but it will help in measurable reality. It'll help in mindset and in potentially in new ways of us working together for the common good. We are shifting away from a mindset that takes the planet for granted. The new mindset is reduce our personal impact on the environment, change our ways, big and small, to keep our planet healthy. Central to this is understanding that we can't keep dumping things into the air and expecting the atmosphere to work it out in our favor. Our families can thrive only within a healthy environment. The EPA estimates it cost $65 billion to comply with the Clean Air Act in its first 30 years. They estimate it saved $2 trillion in healthcare costs in that period, and that by 2020, it will prevent 230,000 early deaths per year. There's a direct relationship between the planet's health and our own. For the next few years, who will protect our air? Who will lead on the environment? Communities will. Communities such as Concord. We have the resources, we have the people, we have the desire, and we have the track record. Gas-powered leaf blowers were invented in Japan to disperse pesticides. In the United States, adoption began in the 1970s, initially in California. Interestingly, the first restrictions on use were implemented 2 years later in multiple California cities. 170 cities have some sort of restriction. Israel bans them completely. Today, there are over 12 million of them in the United States. The market is growing at about 7% per year. And as more homeowners hire commercial landscapers, use is increasing. In Concord, based on EPA data, we estimate there are approximately 850 gas-powered leaf blowers used for 40,000 hours per year. That's over 2 hours of blower use for every man, woman, and child in the town. Manufacturers acknowledge that noise is a problem, but they downplay the emissions problem except where they must. In their defense, it's hard to put rigorous emissions controls on an inexpensive engine you carry on your back. And blowers are sold based on power, not efficiency. You can buy a consumer model that has an airspeed of 210 miles per hour for $135. Gas leaf blowers produce toxic, carcinogenic emissions. No one disputes that. The EPA classifies benzene, butadiene, acetaldehyde, and formaldehyde as hazardous. They cause cancer. Nitrogen oxides cause smog and ground-level ozone. Ozone damages the lungs. We all know carbon monoxide is poisonous, but it interacts with other gases to create CO2 and to amplify methane, which is a powerful greenhouse gas. I'll talk about particulate matter in a moment. Consider that landscapers are exposed for hours a day, and the source of the emissions is within a few feet of their faces. Neighbors and passersby are exposed as well, because these pollutants are at ground level and persist in the neighborhood for hours or longer. We all know that secondhand smoke from cigarettes is a health problem. These emissions are directly analogous. Indeed, many of the chemicals are exactly the same. Edmunds conducted a lab test that compared emissions of a Ford Raptor pickup truck and 2 leaf blowers. Here is some data and a quote from their analysis. NMHC is non-methane hydrocarbons. That measures the hazardous air pollutants that I mentioned on the previous slide. In all categories, the truck is cleaner. By the way, that 3,877 miles is the distance from Concord to San Francisco and then on to Seattle. Okay, so blowers pollute, but cars do too. And there are a lot more cars than blowers, so why bother? Because cars are getting faster, cleaner than blowers are. And as the use of gas-powered lawn equipment increases, the total emissions increases. For example, the California Air Resources Board predicts that in the southern basin, smog-forming emissions from the small gas engines used in lawn equipment will exceed that from cars in 3 years. Now, in all fairness and accuracy, the red line includes blowers, but not only blowers. The point is, we're going in the wrong direction. Particulate matter is another concern. I'm not referring to the dust or the smoke from blowers. PM are pollutants that are very small. The smallest is referred to as PM 2.5. It's about 1/30 the width of a human hair. Here are 3 facts about PM from the EPA. Air pollution kills. A recent study quantified the mortality impact of ozone in PM 2.5. And yes, the noise. It's annoying, it's upsetting, it's unhealthy. You can't get away from it. It impacts people's sleep, it degrades our quality of life, and noise pollution causes stress to humans and animals. It's also a direct health risk, particularly for the workers. Manufacturers test their devices at 50 feet and label them as 65 or 75 decibels. But at the operator's ear, the noise can be 95 to 115 decibels. If there are multiple blowers or a blower is used in a building or nearby a building where the sound is reflected, passersby and residents are at risk too. And I know there's a lot of landscapers in the building here tonight. I know all of you guys wear ear protection, but some people don't. So you can see why many health organizations identify gas-powered leaf blowers as a health problem. We all face some risk, but the biggest risk falls on our children, the landscapers, our seniors, and residents with pre-existing lung or heart conditions. Unhooking ourselves from gas-powered leaf blowers is a challenge, and it's an opportunity. I envision a team of volunteers partnering with landscapers, town departments, property managers, residents, and others. Communication and education will include information alternatives, just as we did for polystyrene. We will pursue grant money for the Concord Public Works, as was done for water fountains. We'll hold demos and evaluations of equipment that conforms to the state specifications for electric lawn and grounds equipment. We've already had a successful trade-in program in October, so we can repeat that and scale it up. Workshops of alternative and low-maintenance landscapes will show residents how to save money, water, and energy. We'll also set up battery recycling and perhaps even create a loaner pool in partnership with CMLP if they're willing. Thank you for listening. I look forward to addressing your questions.
Thank you, Scott. Any questions from my fellow select board members? Public? Oh, I'm sorry.
I do. I have
Okay.
one. I'm wondering if the statistics that you've given, if Section 3A, which was the limitation of when it would be allowed, basically for cleanups, it looked like, rather than regular maintenance. If that were allowed, what difference would your statistics have on the use and the amount of pollution?
I can rework the numbers to do that. The landscapers tell me that they rely on these tools year-round. Some of them are comfortable. Some of them believe that they could make a seasonal ban work. Some property managers I've spoken to believe they could make a seasonal ban work. I can, perhaps in partnership with some of them, determine the numbers.
The leaf problem
Yep.
is kind of the first cleanup and then the last cleanup.
Correct.
And that during the summer, it's a minor issue. There might be pine needles as well, but I mean, it's not the same. So I'd be interested.
Yeah, thank you.
Please come to the mic. Anyone else also should feel free to come up and then come to the mic.
Paul Bohm, Ridgewood Road, Concord. Thank you for the presentation. I'm mindful of the advice from the chair not to debate this article here, but I do want to give some advice on the article. I think any ban of any lawful product is a very serious matter, and I think it deserves a very serious evaluation by the town. And in that light, I think you're lacking a lot of important information here. You presented some information on a planetary basis and some on a small-scale basis. But let me just suggest 4 areas that really need some attention here. And this, again, is focused on increasing the transparency of the proposed article and giving more information to the voters so they can vote with a full set of information. I think first, more data are needed. You presented some data, but there are studies such as the leaf blower study group in the town of Lincoln, which was a very thoughtful and very comprehensive study of not only leaf blowers but garden equipment and putting those in context with other devices. And in that light, we have to evaluate whether this is a feel-good token action or is it a substantive action. And just as an example, in that study, the leaf blowers represented, I think, only about 5 or 9% of all garden equipment, and a much smaller amount of all fossil fuel users and emissions. So in that light, I think more data are needed. More data are also needed on viable options. Leaves have to be moved, and so what are the options? What are the available tools for that? Can they do the job? I think that the town needs to consider that before any ban is considered. What other towns have done as well? There's a lot of precedents in the state of Massachusetts for a number of towns, from Arlington and Newton and Lincoln and others, evaluating this issue. Town of Lincoln studied it in some detail, but at the end of the day came up with a voluntary restriction as opposed to a ban, and certainly not a complete ban. There's been no complete ban in the state of Massachusetts by any town. And I think so the town voters need to be aware that other towns have coped with this and other alternate ways of doing it, including seasonal restrictions, but leading to a proposed ban is fairly important. And last but not least is a cost-benefit analysis. I think the real costs of a conversion need to be evaluated. It's cost to the individuals, cost to the businesses. If everybody who uses a gas-powered leaf blower has to buy an electric blower, what are the costs to the individual, and what are the overall costs of the equipment? What is the cost to the town of enforcement? Are we truly going to enforce this ban? If there are fines, what is the cost to the town of enforcement? What are the unintended consequences, if any, in terms of safety, if leaves can't be removed? So I'm just saying there's a whole set of information which in a serious product ban really needs to be considered, and I respect the planetary view of the importance of reducing fossil fuels. But this is something that's going to hit the residents pretty hard, much harder than banning polystyrene or water bottles, which you can buy elsewhere pretty easily. This is a real consequential, potential total ban for the town of Concord.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just remind everybody, please state your name and address for the record.
Everyone, you can hear me? Yeah. Jim Naris, 341 Madison. I'm also an orthopedic surgeon at New England Baptist Hospital, but I have concerns that you're not addressing some of the health risks for some of the alternatives that are required. It's well known that leaf raking has a lot of health hazards, injury hazards basically. So basically this ban probably would make more people have to rake their leaves. If you just look up at the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission statistics, they go over multiple common injuries, and leaf raking injuries are included in it. In 2012, 38,000 Americans presented to the emergency department with various injuries, mostly musculoskeletal injuries. And that's just the people that went to the emergency department. Those aren't people that went to their primary care doctor's office or their orthopedic surgeon's office. So I don't think you're taking into consideration that. You wonder why, I wouldn't want it. It might be more business for me, but I have 1.8 acres of land. I do my own leaves. I do have a gas leaf blower. I'm concerned I would get injured if I had to rake my all that land. So, thank you.
Thank you. Sir?
John Dowell from 50 Drum Hill Road. And Scott, I'd like to thank you for all that you've done in the past for our town. And I think this is a different situation. And I don't know if there's been any study at all as the amount of people that own gas blowers, like myself and the last, I think the other two speakers, that the effect that I have. When you ban something and take something away from the citizens, that's a little bit different than stopping businesses in our community from selling polystyrene or selling styrofoam. And that's where I think this is a little bit different. And I was curious about the article that you presented, at least the one that I read, said that the basis for it was the mission statement of the town, that they're going to be more green and we're going to reduce emissions in the town, yet you omitted the town. Is that the way that the article is still written?
Correct. The article has a current exemption for the town, for the Concord Public Works.
Yeah, and is that because the DPW is against doing away with blowers? Or do they have a position?
I don't want to characterize, is this, so,
I'm just asking
no,
the language
on
the article.
So Concord Public Works has been extremely generous and helpful with a number of environmental initiatives, including helping with the most recent mower trade-in program. Rich Rain, in my conversation with him, believes it is a question of just time before they go electric. He is sensitive to the workload that they have and the staffing he has and the budget constraints that the town has. He is trying to get the money this year to purchase a commercial grade electric blower because he wants to try it. He's already committed to reducing the use of blowers in any places where they don't possibly need them. And I'm confident that we can work with Concord Public Works to get them, to electric. I want to go after green funds, because there are funds available for municipalities to do this. But the reason there's an exemption there for the town is because I don't want this to be a finance issue for Rich at this town meeting. I want to work through that in other ways and allow him, like everyone else, to vet the equipment.
But the citizens of Concord shouldn't be given the same opportunity?
I understand.
That's my objection.
I understand, thank you. I got it.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mary Ann Marr, 45 Bruce Road. I just brought a couple of notes here. First, I don't know personally anyone that died from using a leaf blower or has cancer. A lot of my family dies from smoking, so I feel like that's more of an issue. Also, I have a little bit of a concern. I'm really worried about the school budget issue going to a vote on a different day, that we won't be able to encourage and allow for our residents that can't be out late at night multiple nights in a row. So I'm very concerned that this article wouldn't come up potentially on the same day where we might have a passionate turnout. It will be really hard for me to leave my children as a single parent several nights during the week. Also, I'll be turning 40. That's not really where I want to celebrate my birthday. Next thing, I also kind of feel like I'm being discriminated against. I don't think it's fair that it's okay for the town. I have over 4 90-year-old neighbors in my yard. They do use gas-powered. I don't know how they would possibly get out there and rake. They do not have children that live in the area, and some of them have no children. I don't know how I can, a couple of things. One of them does use a landscape company, not me. I don't know how she'll afford it. She's 94. Her Social Security's not there. She hasn't updated her home. She's not going to be able to afford that because labor rates will increase. That's just a fact. Why? Because we got to go buy the electric leaf blowers, then we have to buy the extra batteries because the batteries last up to 160 minutes. That's up to. That doesn't mean it lasts 160 minutes. So potentially for someone like me who's not only a resident but also has a family business going on 65 years in Concord, I'm going to have to buy 10 batteries per backpack. The cost is 3 times as much as a gas-powered leaf blower. That's a big expense, 3 times. I do always have the latest equipment. It is as efficient as possible. I do update all the time, so I'm not using something that's old, and so every year things are getting better. I also feel like it's violating my rights saying that I can't use a gas-powered blower at my own home. Yes, I have boys, and they probably should do something. They don't. I don't want to be out there with rake. There's no such thing as 9 to 5 when I get home at 7 or 8 o'clock during the spring and summer. The last thing I want to do is go out there and rake. It's just a fact. I also want to say that the other things that the town has passed have not changed my behavior. I didn't have time to go to the water bottle and the bag issues, but I want to let you know I am still drinking water the same way. So now I am driving to Acton, I'm driving to Costco, they're getting my business, they're getting my money, and I'm burning more gas to get there. And you've actually taken away business from Crosby. So I'm concerned that there is an effect every single time you pass.
I appreciate what you're talking about. I just really want to keep us focused.
Okay. Yep, no problem.
Okay.
So in regards to the leaf blower ban, there are steps that are going to happen. So if this ban does go in effect, there's going to be 5 steps out you didn't think about. How is the woman or the gentleman who is retired going to afford to afford the new labor expense and things like that? So there is a ricochet effect. It's not just about the environment. House oil in Concord, a lot of people have oil in their home. That's worse for the environment. I also feel like that voluntary, like they did with the lawnmower thing, is more important, because when you are voluntarily contributing to giving up your gas-powered leaf blower, you're changing your behavior opposed to being forced. Because I know a lot of people that would rather pay the fine, because the fine is going to be less than the labor charge it would be if you used a rake or an electric gas blower, an electric leaf blower. And lastly, I just wanted to say, You also have to look at the other towns. I would encourage everyone the towns that did pass it, to know that their 911 was inundated with calls, in insane amounts, that they were not able to keep up with it. I'd rather save 911 and other, the police, to focus on other more important issues. And leaf blowers are used year-round. When you mow your grass, there's grass clippings all over your driveway and the walkway. Same thing when you put down fertilizer. Same thing when you have the mosquito and tick control done. It's all using a gas-powered leaf blower. So it is used all year long. It's just not a fall and spring cleanup. So
Thank you very much. Folks, I know, I'm sure there's lots of feelings in the room, but let's try and just stick to the comments. Thanks.
My name's Dick Monahan. I live at 158 Hubbard Street. At the risk of being a little bit redundant, the same budgetary constraints that would give rise to the town being exempted, I would suggest, would impact all of us. The dollars might not be as big, but the effect on everyone is the same. From what I've read and understand, we're not at the point yet where an electric-powered leaf blower is as efficient as a gasoline model. May come. There's tremendous technology that's going on. It may be in 3 or 4 years. I could not stand up and say this. But if the reason for exempting the town is that there is not an efficient enough electric leaf blower to meet their needs, and it would be costly, I would suggest that those same principles would apply to individual homeowners. And also, if I understand the bylaw correctly, we could have a situation where the town or its contractors would use a gas-powered blower to go to any one of the schools, for example. But if that same landscaper had a contract at Concord Academy or Fenn or Middlesex, or worked at one of the golf courses, or at one of the larger apartment complexes, they could not use a gas-powered blower. That distinction seems to me just basically unfair. And finally, I would stand here as an example, unfortunately, of someone who used to be able to shovel his driveway and rake his lawn and so on and so forth. Can't do it anymore. I need some help to that. And to force me to abandon something that I might use 20 minutes a week, I think is not right. I'd love to use an electric blower if one were efficacious enough to work, but I don't think we're at that point yet. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hello there. My name is George Crett again. So I run an electric landscaping company. I don't use any gas blowers and everything like that. And I'd like to just recuse myself from making any real statement about this law, but I would like to offer help to identify some tools that you can go electric, because they're not all bad. I use them. I run a company that does this. It's my livelihood, and I think this is a good opportunity because I'm pretty sure I'm the most knowledgeable person in Massachusetts about this, so come find me. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Hi, my name's Ted Wales, and I actually live in Lexington, but I'm one of the past presidents of the Massachusetts Lawn Care Association, and I work for a company called Hartney Graymont. We have an office here in Concord. We have another office in Needham, and we've been maintaining the health of our clients' landscapes, lawns, trees here in Lexington now for 40 years. We've been in business since 1938. And the one thing that's really important for everyone in this room to remember is that we are service-based organizations. We provide services. The services we provide are the ones...
Sir, I just want to remind you that you're not a resident of the town, so you wouldn't be voting on this at town meeting.
I'm
so
not,
you
but
can-
I'm expressing my clients' concerns. The services that we provide are the ones that our clients wish us to.
Yeah, I think that, I think we're
Commercial
on
and
that.
residential. So that's what's important to keep in mind. And we are also technology-based, Lawn Care Association. And the
Hey,
industry
are
is
you
technology-
representing any lawn care organization, companies in Concord?
Hartney Graymont. Yes, I subcontract for them. And so we're technology-based, and we adopt technology to improve our efficiency. Unfortunately, right now, the options that we have for gas-powered equipment aren't up to the task. If they were, we would use them immediately. We're not opposed to this.
You mean electric?
We're not opposed, yes. And the other thing I'd like to mention, yes, gas-powered equipment does make noise, but there are OSHA regulations that require that all companies that use gas-powered equipment that has a certain level of decibel noise is required by law that the employees wear ear protection, eye protection to protect them. The same with if you were at Logan Airport directing an airliner to its gate. It's required by law that you wear hearing protection. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone's going to wear that hearing protection. It's just like we might have a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit here, but that doesn't mean everyone's going to obey it, even though they know they should.
Sir,
So-
I don't
so-
want to.
So and the other thing I'd like to mention is that, yes, there is such a thing as low-maintenance properties, but that's for...
Listen, we want to hear from Concord citizens and not about your business, okay? You've had enough time here. Let's pass the mic on to the next person.
Thank you.
Mark Martinez, 66 Alfred Circle. Will this presentation be online or available? And I guess the reason for the question is exactly what the select person before, and that is, we're all sort of curious about statistics being used, and in particular in preparation between now and the board meeting. So it would be helpful to understand the studies and other statistics that are cited. Also, I'll note that I think that there have been at least 2 Concord Journal articles. And Rich Rain, who's the head of the Concord DPW, has publicly stated that gas-powered leaf blowers are critical to maintain public land efficiently, and the technology isn't there yet to meet the demands of municipal operations. I think it's pretty clear where the DPW stands on this. And, all anyone has to do is go look at the journal. Can we ask specific questions of Scott?
Yeah, that's actually what we'd like to encourage versus statements.
So can you just explain why you picked, or why you didn't distinguish between 2-cycle and 4-cycle motors, engines, and specifically why you picked leaf blowers? If you look at lawn mowers, trimmers, tractors, those 3 actually account for 72% of the sort of gas-powered lawn and lawn care engines. And as the gentleman specified before, blowers, leaf blowers, and vacuums, by the way, are about 8 or 9%.
So there's not much of a precedent for banning mowers and trimmers. There is a precedent for blowers. And when I think about the offsets we're going to need to do and working with businesses to help them and residents adjust to this reality over the next 3 years, I think we'll have an easier time of doing that with leaf blowers than we will with the other devices. I also believe that in terms of hours of use, what I'm told by people in the industry that it goes mowers, blowers, and then some of the other trimming devices. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I'm told. So I figured let's go for the devices that we stand the greatest chance of being able to help people adjust to living without, that still are volume users, and that, quite frankly, other people have found they can live without, or at least for a period of time.
Can you address, I think that it was cited before that you received input from the town, landscapers, scientists, and other communities. Can you just briefly touch on, clearly DPW has a position, but who are the other committees that you worked with at the town, or I guess other communities that sort of, and I think we heard earlier tonight that there was no community, this was news to me, that actually has a complete ban. Correct. So can we agree on whether there is a ban, whether there isn't a ban? Where are we on that?
I don't think any community has done a complete ban for their entire town. I believe there's a couple towns in California that have put some program together called an AGSA green zone where they don't use any, of these kinds of gear and other things and fertilizers. I don't believe, Mark, to the best of my knowledge, there's not a town that has completely banned them.
And sorry for a long question. The first part of it, can you just cite real quickly who you worked with or what committees you worked at with the town specifically? If we're going to sort of, and the only reason I noted is that in your resolutions, I think it noted that. So I'd just like to know who at the town you worked with.
Yeah, I mean, I've presented to the Board of Health, multiple conversations with the Department of Public Works, certainly attend conservation meetings, Concord Sustainable Energy Committee, Concord CAN, there may be others.
I just want to jump in here for you and for any of the other members of the public who are going to speak. Let's really try and not, this isn't a debate. So,
I'm not debating. I'm literally trying to do is to find out information for questions.
Okay.
So if you were to allocate, how much of this band is noise and how much is emission?
I have no answer for that.
Okay. Other towns, specifically Lincoln, have chosen sort of more of a carrot versus a stick model. Can you sort of lay out why you chose a ban versus incentives, rebates, those sort of more voluntary measures?
Yeah, I think, as I pointed out on the slide, I think this is actually a ban with incentives.
I'm not sure I understand the incentives part. It seems like after 2 years, if any resident owns
Right, but there's a lot of work that we're going to be doing between now and 2021 to help the community adjust, right? It's not just like we're going to ban it. We're going to have all sorts of, some of the programs that I mentioned here. I don't know if that answers your question. I think your question was why, what was your question again, please?
Just why a ban versus why not using more, let's just say, cooperative measures?
If, in preparation for the town meeting, I'll be glad to interact with you and anyone who wants to discuss alternatives. The research and the thinking that I've done on this over the past couple of years leads me to believe that the way to get the emission reductions and the quality of life enhancement and to protect the health of the community is best served by banning this device. That's where I ended up. Other people have totally legitimate alternative outcomes, and I'll be glad to work through and see if we can find some middle ground.
Last one.
The hook is coming.
I think so. Are you aware of any other town that's exempted one entity, such as the town DPW?
Yes.
Who's that?
I know there's a number of them. I mean, in Newton, I think, in New Jersey, the professional landscapers can't use them, but the residents can. I think maybe Brookline may have an exemption for their DPW.
Scott, why don't we suggest that a lot of these questions are things that you can follow up directly and individually, and I would encourage
Or
that
we're happy to
happen.
address at the town meeting.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Just as a parting shot, Brookline is 13 times more dense than Concord. Newton is 7 times more dense. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
My name's excuse me, Peter Rapocho. I'm 246 Ornac. I'm the golf course superintendent at the Concord Country Club. And Scott, I applaud you for your work with the environment. As a golf course superintendent, and Troy Noble from Neshata Country Club here as well, we can attest that we are stewards of the environment, and we're certainly trying to do our best to protect Mother Nature and its resources. And I think with a complete ban like this, you kind of discredit all the education, all the hard work, all the time and effort that individuals, such as myself, other people, educated turf grass professionals, landscape professionals, put in to be able to help do all the wonderful things for the environment. We're fortunate, there's 416 golf courses in Massachusetts. 11 of them are Autobahn certified properties. You actually have 2 of them out of those 11 located in the town of Concord. If there was a way to clean leaves off a golf course without using gasoline, we would be doing it already. I can assure you of that. The technology is just not there to do it. And one of the questions I had for you was, we have mowers that are pulled by diesel-powered tractors. under this ban, that would be okay to do. What if you were to take that mower, put a 3-point hitch blower on the back of it? It's the same tractor going down the fairway, the same emissions coming out, but instead of mowing the fairway, you have a blower on the back of it. Would that fall under the criteria of the ban, or would that be something different? Because if that falls under the ban, then the mower would, and then where does this kind of snowball and stop? So those are some of the things that, I've talked with you a little bit before, but I think you really need to focus on, the goodwill of what people are trying to do to protect the environment and really try to, promote the spirit of goodwill, being a good neighbor, doing all you can to, protect our resources, because at the end of the day, we're all in this together, and it's, we're all trying to earn a living, but at the same time, we are all trying to do the right thing, and I think that's what everyone in this room has, certainly been talking about today. So I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Todd Stout from Perfection Landscaping. I'm not a resident, but I do a lot of work in town.
Just make sure you confine it to.
I'm going to keep it real
Thank
brief,
you.
I promise.
All right.
I think what Scott doing is trying to do is very noble, but we're not there yet. We had a meeting the other day, and like I said, he's doing ready, fire, aim, not ready, aim, fire. I don't think we should put a band in and then try to fix it over the next 2 years. I think we should try to fix it over the next couple of years and put in a voluntary program. Scott Ryan and I had a conversation on Thursday night. We had a conference call, and we talked about putting together a committee that could work on this. I've talked to a couple of the manufacturers. We're 5 to 8 years away from battery-powered blowers being efficient. I understand George has his electric lawnmower, and I've asked him questions. The 6 times I've helped him push it on his trailer because the battery's been dead. It is true. So
Okay.
I'm just telling you, I think it's a great idea. I've looked into all the electric stuff. I've bought some of the electric stuff. It doesn't work. When it works, I think we're all going to have it. I would love to get rid of my $80,000 gas bill every year. But and another thing is, my fear is that the Concord residents, you guys have this thing about water and trees and stuff like that. If people are spending $4,000, $5,000, $8,000, $10,000 on a hand rake spring cleanup, I have a fear they're going to start taking down all their trees so they get rid of the leaves. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. And then leaving grass clippings and leaves, that's a fire hazard.
I don't think you have to worry about our trees.
Oh, I'm just telling you. I know people that are going to start taking down trees if there's a lot of leaves, and he seems to agree with me because he's shaking his head yes. So I think, Scott, that we should all work together, table this for a couple of years, put together a committee for the people that do it as a living, residents for it, residents against it. Let's work with the manufacturers and do it the right way. Let's do ready, aim, fire, not ready, fire, aim. I think Scott agrees with me. He just doesn't want to.
Hey, my name is Ryan Hargersheimer. I live 84 Lee Drive. I also run Ryan's Lawn here in Concord. We manage 67 properties, almost exclusively all in Concord. So my big issue with this ban is, there's many things, but certainly for me, is we as a company maintain more land than the town does. I have a huge problem with the exemption of the town using these blowers and residents not being able to, commercial companies not being able to. I just think that is totally unfair, especially when you have businesses, and I know many of these guys over here who run landscape businesses who operate and manage way more town property than the town actually does. I also want to go over the economic impact to the consumer would be astronomical right now, because we don't have a piece of technology that is even close to what we have. Our job as landscapers is to provide a great result at a cost that is, somewhat reasonable to the consumer. If we have to buy all this new equipment, if we have to spend, for example, maybe it takes 1.5 hours to clean your property, when this ban goes into effect, it might take 3 or 4 hours. With 5, 6 guys, that cleanup bill goes from like $600 to maybe $2,000. So I just think that we're not looking at the economic impact of this for everyone. I mean, me commercially as well. This is probably the most important piece of equipment that we have at our dispense almost every day throughout the year. It's kind of like telling Ching Ann they can't sell a Mai Tai. You know what I mean? It's kind of like telling the toy shop that you can't sell toys anymore. This is really important for us, and I just think that, like Todd said, we need to get here in 6 to 7, 8 years. That technology might be there, but for right now, it's just clearly not.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Mike Amster, 44 Prairie Street in Concord. I'm pretty encouraged with all the things that I've heard from everybody this evening, particularly the comment about ready, fire, aim. I think it makes more sense to wait until we have a solution before you start to think about fixing it. But on that basis, I'd like to make some comments and ask questions. I understand that these leaf blowers can be annoying, but that's kind of a subjective comment. We live in a community, and that means that you've got civilization to deal with. Many things in the suburban environment that may be annoying to certain people: lawn maintenance equipment, wood chippers, large construction equipment, their backup alarms, road repair equipment, and living nearby certain community activities such as schools and kids playing in the street. I've actually heard of people complaining that kids in the street were making too much noise. The article that was referred to in one of the journal articles indicated, as somebody said already, leaf blowers account for about 9% of all the lawn maintenance equipment in use, which also includes tractors, chainsaws, snow blowers. They are more numerous and just as hazardous. Now, anybody here ever been a Boy Scout? Remember when you were asked to go off and find a smoke shifter? Well, anytime you burn wood, charcoal, propane, they emit a variety of hazardous, irritating, and carcinogenic materials. That's pretty clear. But are we to then prohibit wood burning, heating, fireplaces, outdoor barbecues, fire pits, campfires, etc.? If we go down this road, we need to make sure that we're getting we're identifying and addressing the greatest risks with the least value. How are we going to start regulating all of these? And then also the discussion about exempting the town. I think that puts the residents, the people who have to do the work themselves. I'm also obviously aware of the issues involved with the commercial lawn maintenance equipment and those folks. I've tried electric leaf blowers and they don't work. And it seems to me that there's a general consensus that that's the case.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Scott Gillis. I'm a 29-year resident of 80 Alfred Circle in Concord, Massachusetts. With your permission, I'd like to ask Scott a few direct questions, and then I'd like to tell you a little story. Very brief story. Scott, I have a few questions for you, just in the spirit of full disclosure, because I believe in total transparency, honesty, and directness. I've asked these questions of Scott, and I know the answer, but I want you to hear the answer. They're quick. There won't be any surprises. There are quick, short answers. There's no need for surprises in life. Scott, before I ask you a question, I love Mother Nature as you do, and I compliment you on your desire to take care of Mother Nature.
Thank you.
First question. Have you ever used a gas or electric leaf blower yourself?
No, I have not. I use a rake and a tarp, and my neighbor comes and scoops them up with his massive machine.
Thank you very much. So we've got a gentleman proposing a ban on a piece of equipment that he says is unnecessary, and there are alternatives, yet he has never used that equipment himself. Scott, you said you spent the last 2 years...
I don't smoke cigarettes, but I don't want my child smoking them.
My story has to do with that, and we'll get to that in a minute. Scott, you said you spent the last couple of years on this project, and Lincoln was mentioned. Do you know a lady by the name of Jamie Banks?
I do.
She's a lovely lady. She's a PhD scientist, and she's the head of quiet communities. And she is perhaps one of the most expert people on emissions and power equipment. Scott, when you consulted with her about this topic, what advice did she give you on education and incentives versus a ban?
Hard for me to characterize that conversation briefly. Jamie does not believe that bans are the most effective way to accomplish this.
That is correct. That is her belief. I've been researching this for 1 week, not 2 years. I spoke at length with Jamie. I've gone to her website and I've written a lot of her work. Jamie told me quite directly and emphatically that she strongly suggested that Scott not pursue a ban.
Let's just stay on point to what Scott has.
Okay.
Yeah. Right.
So instead of asking this question, I will make a statement. I've researched the air quality in Massachusetts. Scott Richardson has presented air quality problems in California. California has been described as one of the places with the worst air quality in America. Massachusetts has excellent air quality. In the most recent air quality report, which measures air quality on an ongoing basis around the state, we pass all of the EPA measurement standards. So our air quality is already excellent. I'm not saying that we don't want to keep it that way, but our air quality is excellent. And forgive me, but I have to ask Scott, are you aware of those data?
Well, not that specific data. Certainly I can speak to why I use California data. It's because of the California Air Resources Board. And one of the elements of the Clean Air Act is that states could adopt particular dimensions of legislation that exceeded the APA, and therefore California, being one of those states that was grandfathered in, has a fairly rigorous environmental measurement program, and of course because of the historic problems with pollution in the LA basin, they focus there. My point is not to say that our air is as bad as California's. What I was using that chart to illustrate is that the trend is going in the wrong direction. That although gas-powered lawn equipment is cleaner now than it was 30 years ago, that's true, it's becoming, compared to the improvement in automobiles, where we want to look to protect that air in Massachusetts, where we want to look to protect the air in Massachusetts is to the small off-road engines. That's where we want to focus. In Concord, we tend to be out ahead on some of these environmental issues. We understood the issues with private water and privatization of water and packaging and plastics very early on. Now that's around the world. Concord was on the bleeding edge of bottled water as a topic. Now that conversation is global. We were sort of midstream on plastic bags. We were not leading edge, but certainly in the early pack on polystyrene. I want us to be ahead of the curve on this. And this is Scott, this is where we want to look to safeguard the air. And my concern is that for the next few years at least, we don't have what you and I take for granted, which was an active EPA. And so I think we need to consider that the best way to preserve our air is through local action.
Mystery solved. And if we could just wrap this up fairly quickly, I know we've got a lot of very patient people in this room.
A couple of quick points. George described himself as the most expert person in Concord on this equipment. I've been using both my electric and my gas-powered blower for years. But wanting to know the latest and greatest, I went and I spent 2 hours with George on Sunday, and he allowed me to use and he demonstrated his equipment. My conclusion was that the blowers are not even close to gas blowers. It doesn't mean that he can't, by using 2 at a time, can't run a business, but they're not even close in terms of performance. Number 2, I used a decibel meter to measure the sound, and while they may not be as loud in decibels, I was measuring 80 plus decibels, and I found them irritating. I would not use them without ear protection, and I would not use them on a Sunday in my neighborhood. I told you I'd tell you a little story. A very quick story.
You're losing your audience here.
Okay, very quick story. Am I done? Yeah. Scott mentioned tobacco. There are some residents in Concord that think tobacco and marijuana are bad things, but they're not banned. There are some people that think alcohol and sugary drinks are bad, but they're not banned. There are some people that think that gas-guzzling trucks and SUVs are bad, but they're not banned.
Mm-hmm.
There are some people who believe that chicken, poultry, and pork should not be consumed because when they're made on farms, industrial farms, it's cruel and bad for the government. And I said to a young man, I said, you know, this is like saying you can't sell poultry, beef, and pork in Concord. And here's the interesting part of the story. He corrected me, and he said, no, Scott, the ban that Scott Richardson is proposing is not like stopping you from selling pork and beef and poultry. It's like telling every resident of Concord, except the DPW, that you can't eat meat. So,
Okay, I think that's the point. Okay, we're done. Thank you. Scott, I see you have left the podium, so I assume we're finished here? Any other comments?
I just had a couple more suggestions, Scott. Yeah, I think the town exemption in the article is going to cause you a lot of trouble if you haven't figured that out. I think you should also address the whole leaf disposal process comprehensively. I mean, there's the site where you have to gather the leaves, but it's also, like, for me, the experience of doing it privately, it's taking them to a dump. Otherwise, you have other private owners, who knows where they're putting the leaves, into the wetlands, you know? I mean, it's, you have to transport the leaves somewhere. Well, you're talking about the environment, so it's like this whole comprehensive thing. You're using your vehicle, you're using the blower, the vehicle, so that's something you should think about. But it's also, it's an interesting article because maybe you are cutting edge. You're finding the first world problem now. This isn't a ban with a store that you can threaten, you know, you won't attend. This is, you're telling a business that uses these these devices that provide that service that they can't, and if you don't use them, it's kind of, we don't have that leverage on those folks. So that's something to think about as well. It's a different kind of market that you're trying to manage. And one other thing was, maybe you could look at it a little more dynamically, like maybe by zones, like a Zone C. Is there really a need for blowers in a quarter-acre site where the house takes up so much space, whereas someone living double A, they don't have neighbors, so, and their sites are so much larger, so maybe you can modify how you're managing that, you know? So just trying to look at it different ways, that's all. Thanks, Jane.
And we also have, thanks to our coverage of this public hearing, we have an email question. This is from Mark Galis on Prescott Lane. Subject is, he's in favor of Article 46, and Mark writes, "We don't need leaf blowers on land that is not paved. Lawn companies encourage unsustainable, unecological monospecies, ecologically dead and artificial and non-organic chemical intensive lawn care that makes money for these polluting companies to the detriment of nature and community health. How did Mother Nature ever survive before gas leaf blowers were invented?" Again, that came in on email. I believe so, Aaron. It's okay. Only one that came in that's related. And were there others that I should have included? No, it was about. Okay, great. All right. So feedback on the feedback. Thank you very much, and thank you all for staying.